all this stuff that's on the news. I just found my cousin with a gunshot wound.
Okay. Sir, is she alive?
No, no.
Police arrested 6 people in connection with the heinous crime.
The youngest Wagner son, Jake, was in court today. It is his custody dispute over a daughter with victim Hanna Rhoden that investigators say prompted the murders.
As George Wagner IV stands trial, his mother Angela and younger brother Jake are expected to testify against him.
Hi guys, I'm a little nervous because I have a new mic and I haven't used it before, so let me know if it sounds okay, if I'm too loud. Anyway, how's everybody doing? I hope you guys had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I hope your family put the fun in dysfunctional if you have that kind of family. I know I have that kind of family. We had a pretty quiet one here. I made ham because there's only the 4 of us, and so I didn't want to do a big old turkey. I've been doing a big old turkey every year since we've been here in Florida, and it's just a bunch of leftovers that you can only have so many turkey sandwiches before you're like done with it. Oh, good. Thank you, Bessie. I appreciate that, babe. So and I just have one little tiny complaint about my Thanksgiving. This is the 3rd year in a row where I have not gotten to have my favorite thing to have on Thanksgiving, which is the jellied cranberry. I don't know why I like it. I just do. And tracking it down at a store is like trying to find, I don't even know, like a Cabbage Patch Kid in the 80s, I guess. It's ridiculous. Like they just don't have them, and I don't know. Anyway, so that was my one complaint. And I made mashed potatoes and homemade macaroni and cheese and green bean casserole and stuffing. Well, not really stuffing because it wasn't in the turkey, but dressing. And so it was a good Thanksgiving. It was quiet. It was low key. It was nice. But now, I got this mic from a Black Friday sale, and I really like it. I just, my son is the one that was like, Mom, your videos are great, but your audio when you speak is not good. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I was thinking, well, hold on a second. Maybe it's because, you just don't, like my voice, because, when you hear my voice, it's usually coming with some type of, let's be honest, nag. I usually am asking for help on something or something for him to do, So he's like, no, no, mom, it's like the audio is not good. And I was like, okay. He's like, yeah, but your voice is annoying. So perfect. Thanks so much for your input. So let me catch you up on what has been occurring this week with the trial. Okay. So when we last, why is this doing this every time? It's very annoying. I guess maybe he just wants you to be sure you're sure about sharing audio. I don't know. It used to be an automatic setting. I used to have it clicked all the time, and now it won't stay clicked. Whatever. Have it your way, YouTube and StreamYard. All right. So over the Thanksgiving holiday of last week, so Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and then they broke for Thanksgiving, and I don't think that they came back on Friday because Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Yeah, no, because the last stream was 5 days ago, so I think they ended it on Wednesday. So let me just update you. Basically, what they did over the Thanksgiving holiday was enter exhibits and jury instructions. And apparently, Jake has testified to the state's satisfaction. So the death penalty has been taken off the table. And I also read an article, and now I can't remember where I read it, but Ohio has a moratorium on the death penalty as something that I read, but because I can't find the article, I can't be 100% on that. I just don't remember where I read it because I be reading tons of stuff. So today we're back in court. The jury is present. To me, it sounded like at the end of the day Wednesday that the jury instructions were finished, but I have to admit it was difficult to understand without the closed captioning, number one. Oh, speaking of, let me fix that. Make sure that's fixed over here too. It was difficult to understand without the closed captioning, and the audio was not good. So there's that. And okay, the other thing I wanted to tell everybody is this video. All right, for Wagner. Well, as I was working on it, what I wanted to do was take his direct testimony, right, and mix it with the 2018 and even some of the 2017 wiretaps, right? That because that's I wanted to show everybody just as a recap why his attorney was asking him the questions that he was asking him, because it was all really to refute, because they don't have really any, to be fair, physical evidence like fingerprints, DNA, any hair, anything like that, fiber, to connect George, Jake, or Billy Wagner to the crime. They do have the footprints in blood, the shoe prints, I should say, shoe prints in blood, and they have that receipt showing Angela purchasing those tennis shoes. Just a second, I got to fix something. All right, at Walmart, they have that, and they have the video of her, and they also have the parking lot video where you can clearly see that George is in the vehicle. Okay, so there's that. But the only thing really tying George to the crime scene is Jake. And so what I wanted to do is put something together and then get you guys' opinion on whether or not the state proved its case. But, and I'm still working on it, I will have it for you guys. Then I came up with another concept too, while I was doing that. But it's a very, very lengthy process because you got to listen to it, figure out which clips, put the right on a big undertaking. But likely today and tomorrow will be closing arguments. I expect the states to be lengthy, especially considering how lengthy her opening statement was. And then I expect the defenses to be far lengthier than their opening was. So, and so does everybody else who's writing about this case. So they're saying that they expect it to be Monday and Tuesday, and that the jury will probably get it Wednesday. So I figured, okay, so that gives me, time to stream in the morning, and then, time to stream at night. But in between, I can be working on the video. But it just, these clips, I have to give it up to these clip channels, because it's a lot of work to clip stuff. Especially when, like, George's direct testimony was, I think, total. And I'm talking about his total time on the stand, not counting the morning break, not counting the lunch break, and not counting the afternoon break. I think that George testified for something like over 10 hours, I think it was. And then you gotta, and some of the questions that he was asked a couple of times, which I thought was interesting. But I tell you this, hearing the wiretaps being played again, and simply just being able to focus on the wiretaps and the contents of them without having to pause for commentary, you hear a lot more. And I have really come around to changing my mind to this family dynamic. I think that we have all been under the impression that Jake and Angela were thick as thieves and that George was the odd man out. But I have to tell you, when I was listening to the wiretaps, not just the ones from 2018, but also the ones from 2017, I noticed something that I didn't notice before, it's very obvious. The tone in which Angela speaks to George versus the way that she speaks to Jake. She is actually more understanding, and what's the word I'm looking for? I patient, understanding, and consoling. She consoles George when he is upset. She calms him down, and it's just completely different than the way that she speaks to Jake. Most of the time when she is speaking to Jake, she is accusatory. She's irritated with him for one reason or another. And I'm talking about going back to before he even married Beth, because I understand why she is annoyed with Jake after Beth. It's because, Jake brought another person into the circle of trust who Angela did not feel earned her place in the circle of trust. And Beth and Angela butted heads. They just did. Beth had no idea what she was marrying into at all. And so I found that to be interesting. And I just want to make sure that I want you guys to hear all of that, but like in one place. So I thought, well, I feel like the jury is going to be, I cannot imagine a circumstance where the jury is going to take, this is going to be a short deliberation. I've been wrong before, but there is so much to this case that I cannot fathom the jury coming back quickly. I just can't. There's just so much evidence. And, there's not just the serious charges, right? Which is the 8 counts of first degree, but there are other charges as well, burglary, stuff like that. So, I can't imagine a circumstance where the jury is going to be deliberating in a short amount of time. I don't know. We'll see. I've been wrong before. I've been wrong where I thought there's no way they're going to come back quickly, and they did. So we'll see. But I mean, this was a freaking what? I think we're on day number 40. I think this is 49. Hang on, let me look. Hey, Jen, good to see ya. Hey, if you haven't done so already, will you do me a favor and give me a thumbs up on the stream? I greatly appreciate it. Let me look and see how Law and Crime has it listed, what day this is. Yeah, this is day 49, but were days, probably I think 5 in total, where there wasn't testimony. So for the jury, we're like on, they've been listening for 45 days. Yeah, I cannot imagine a circumstance where they would come back quickly. And plus, the other thing I wanted to do with these videos is, I'm so sorry it's taking such a long time. I feel awful about it. It's videos, man, they're just tedious. They're not hard, just tedious. Anyway, I'm trying really hard to put it together in a way where people can make up their own mind the way that the jury would, right? But it's very hard to do that. It's hard to balance giving the full picture, but not overwhelming, number one, but then also not just showing the stuff that could be looked at as showing guilt. Unfortunately, when you listen to the wiretaps, to be quite honest, and this was done obviously intentionally by the state, because these are their clips that they put together. They're not the total of they're not the totality of what was recorded. And I think the jury is going to get the whole thing, all of the wiretaps, the whole, all of them, the totality, the entirety. That's what I should say. Can't even think. I already have the Mondays. So, I did the best. I'm doing the best that I can. And I want to do not just George's direct testimony, right? Because I think, this is my opinion, I think that, yes, the jury is up. Oh, I thought George got his hair did. He did not. It was, oh, okay. So we're on day number 49 of trial, and we're on day 132 of leather vest jeans combo. Hi, George. Anyway, so if I were on this jury and I were deliberating in this case, what it down to is George's testimony, both on direct and cross, and wiretaps. because I'm looking. Obviously, I've paid attention. We've all paid attention to the physical evidence that was shown, right, from the crime scenes, the pictures of the crime scenes, the shoe impressions, and blood. That testimony, that's going to be important. But I think for me, if I were on the jury, one of the main factors that I would focus on would be George Wagner's testimony, direct testimony, cross-examination, and those wiretaps. That's that's what I that's what I'm going to show you guys all in one spot, and then we'll talk about them as they come out.
Today is November 28th.
Also, excuse me, Your Honor, let me just mute you really quick because I don't want to be rude. Also, tomorrow, if you have Peacock, the docu-series, it's 3 parts, I believe, of Casey Anthony premieres the 29th, which is tomorrow. I plan on talking about that, but I want to give people an opportunity to see it before I talk about it, because who wants spoilers? So I'm probably going to put a poll up on the community tab to see who all has Peacock and plans to watch it, and then who doesn't have Peacock, and that way I can tailor the way that I cover it for those who have it without spoiling it for them, and talk in depth enough for the people who don't have it. That's my plan. So I have a lot of projects coming up. Plus, there's a trial coming up in the Floridas. Okay. There's 2 actually. No, one is Wisconsin, one is Florida. It's the face eating trial is what they're calling it. And I definitely want to cover that one. And the reason I want to cover that one is because I think it's apropos, particularly for the Vallow Daybell trial that's coming up whenever the heck whenever they end up going to trial, because this isn't a guilt or not guilt trial. This is a was the defendant legally insane at the time that he committed this crime? And so that's what we're going to be watching that one too. So we're going to end 2022 with a big old bang here at the Ward. So here we go. And I know that my other half, Dr. B, very, very interested in these closing arguments. And I'm sure she's listening. I know she wanted to perhaps come up on panel. And she knows that the doors, I mean, she's always got an open invitation. Oh, also, Momo Rottweiler Investigations uploaded the part 1 of the jail calls between Chandler Halderson and Chazal Basal and Kat and Dulce Melander. You guys should go check that out for sure. Very interesting.
You may be seated. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. It's good to see you all here as we begin another day of trial in this case. We have reached the point at which counsel for each side will be giving.
We're gonna
closing
talk about it,
arguments.
Bethy Cakes.
Before
I
we
just want to
begin that,
give
however,
people the
I will inform
opportunity
you
to
now
watch it
that the
first
court has granted
on
a
Rottweiler
motion,
Investigations, because she did a
dismissing
wonderful job putting it together with the
specifications
crime scene
4,
pictures.
5, and 6.
But I want to talk about it because there's some
counts
things
1,
in there
2,
that I
3,
was
4, 5,
like,
6, 7, and 8. Now, those first 8 counts
what?
were aggravated murder counts. The charges remain, and the other specifications as to those counts, that specifications 1, 2, and 3 remain. However, specifications 4, 5, and 6 to those first 8 counts were what are referred to as death specifications, and that means that the death penalty.
She really did. She did a
is no
wonderful job.
longer
I'm so proud
possible
of her.
in this case, and that you will not be sequestered. All right. Now, is counsel for the state ready to give closing argument this time?
Yes, Your Honor.
Is the defense ready to give closing argument? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, closing arguments of counsel are designed to persuade. Closing
Hey,
arguments
Julia
of counsel in and of
Sparkles, good to
themselves
see you, babe.
are not evidence, and but each side will argue what they feel that you should find the evidence has shown. All right, the state may give closing argument.
Uh-oh. She's got a binder, folks. This is going to be long. Brace yourselves. Get you some snacks. Get you a drink so that you stay hydrated. You know, hydration is very important.
Just want to, first of all, start by thanking each and every one of you. You guys have probably served, at least as far as I know, the longest of any criminal jury anyhow. And what's in addition to that
Hey,
is
Cement
each of you
Shoes,
have
good to
paid
see ya.
strict attention every time you've been in the courtroom. And I know we've tried your patience with all the stops and starts, especially the stops. And there was a lot of dead days and dead time. And we apologize for that. As the court said, a lot of times there's things that we need to take care of that doesn't involve the jury. And so that's how we end up handling that. So we started this back in July when we were in that sweaty gymnasium without any air conditioning. And here we are, you know, shivering when we walk outside. So, and I also want to, you know, just apologize for the enormous amount of evidence in this case, right? Obviously, when you have 8 victims instead of just 1 victim, you have 8 autopsies and all that follows there. And if you have 4 crime scenes instead of 1, then you have all of that. And I kind of talked about that in opening statement, but I think you now have a better appreciation for exactly how immense the evidence is this. Now is the time for you guys to do the work, right? You're going to be hearing closing arguments this morning and probably into this afternoon. Probably tomorrow the court will give you an instruction.
Oh, Jen.
As the court said, nothing that I say, nothing that the attorney for Mr. Wagner say are evidence. And specifically, if I say something that does not match or meet your recollection of what the evidence was in this case, the court will tell you to rely on your collective memories, okay? So I'm not purposely trying to misstate anything. In fact, I try to purposely state it as correctly as I can. But again, if I say something that you're like, oh, that's not how I remember it, again, the court will be instructing you that you have to rely on your collective.
I'd like to apologize now for doggy noises.
Also, the court is going
Nestor has decided to join us today for closing arguments.
Have been admitted, okay? You know, things like these items.
So shout out to Nestor.
As far as the shoe evidence, the shoes themselves.
Alice is here as well. However, she's decided to sit this out and take a nap.
The concrete buckets and all the contents of that. However, it will be.
Hey, Callie, good morning.
From the 3rd floor, so if you are in
Good
the
to see you,
deliberation room and
Corky.
want
Good to
some
see
evidence, then
you.
will be instructed to let the court staff
Oh,
know
my
and
faves
they
are
can bring that
here.
out so that you guys can look at whatever you want.
Okay.
You
Nestor
should
has
have-
decided
when you
that
start
was
the assignment, you should have things like
10 too many, and he's out.
various documents and such.
Peace out,
That'll
he said.
fit readily into the jury room, and so it will give you as much of that stuff as we can. But again, if you want to see some physical evidence, or you want to listen to an audio tape or one of those videos that really weren't videos but audios, then just let court staff know, and they will make sure to accommodate you. Not that you necessarily have to do that. I don't want you to feel like you have to. Obviously, you saw the evidence as we presented it in the courtroom, but there might be certain items that you want to go back to.
I don't want to be this person, but she reminds
At
me
the
of the
beginning of this
teacher that
trial,
gives you
one
way
of the
too many
things I
instructions
remember
on the
saying
class
to
assignment
you
when the
is that
directions are also printed on the assignment.
that there was not a reason for these murders to happen. And I think
Uh-oh.
now you can appreciate what I meant by that. The senselessness of these murders.
It was the cement shoes. It's a deal breaker. He's like, I'm out.
No evidence, no information that any of the victims in this case did anything untoward. And half of them, at least, were killed simply because they were there. I want to go back to the victims now.
Alice is so annoyed with it that she's got her back to me. She's like, Mom, I can't with this lady. Sorry.
Right? We are here because
every other day of testimony, she's been in my lap. Today, she said,
in their sleep, all of them unarmed and unsuspecting that anything was afoot. Frankie Rhoden, 20 years old, with his son, his two sons, there with Hanna Hazel. We heard a lot about his derby car racing. He loved his children, he loved his derby car racing, he loved his fiance. He had just started a new job. He working for a former teacher of his. Basically on, just at the brink of beginning the rest of his life, right? We knew that he liked hunting, apparently chicken fighting as well, but we also knew that he was not a drinker.
Amelia.
And he definitely was not involved in any of the
You're welcome.
Business, right? We heard testimony that Christine.
Thank you for being here and listening to this with me, because I know this has been a long case.
And we know that he didn't, right? We know that none of them did, because we have autopsy toxicology that show that. Frankie's crime, for which he got the death penalty, was allegedly kissing his niece on the lips. That's the only thing that anybody said about him. That and the fact you heard from the defendant himself that Frankie was the type of man that you would have to go through to get to his family. So again, that whole, if he knows, if he's left alive, he would figure it out and possibly seek vengeance. And that is why.
I'm sorry, you guys. I did not think they would show that. And I can tell you right now that neither did law and crime. And this is going to be an issue.
Yes.
I'm sorry, you guys. Oh, bless it. Cement shoes. I can't. Hey, Charlie, good to see you, babe. How you doing? I hope you had a good Thanksgiving. Cement shoes. I can't. Yeah, this is going to be in an issue, obviously. Miss Canepa, you're better than that. Come on. You should have given Law and Crime, Court TV, anybody streaming the trial, a heads up. Rude. We weren't ready, and now I'm going to have to go back. Likely, this is what makes me mad, because I mean, I know you guys don't care about the live chat replay, but I have to edit. I'm going to have to edit it. So I'm not going to use, I might use YouTube's blurring tool. I might try it out and see how that works. If I don't like the results, I'll probably just clip that part out. So, Charlie, all that sliding you do, I hope you stretch first. Stretching is important. I know, Amelia. This is going to be, an 8-hour-long sidebar because of this 2-second slip. Bruh. Okie dokie, Charlie. I'm thinking of you, and I'm thinking of your sis always. I know it's tough, and you're doing such a wonderful job, really. If you need anything, hit me up. You know my email.
Hanna Hazel, Gilley, very proud of her son, her 6-month-old son. She and Frankie and Ruger shared a home together. They have just taken that home over from Dana and Chris.
I will be right back, but I'm going to be in chat, so I'll be acting a fool. I can time people out.
Who was the mother of Brentley.
If it gets too bad, I'm going to get Alice on the case. I'm just kidding. You guys are always so cool. I hardly have to mod at all.
And she was there when Frankie took the last picture he ever would take of his 2 sons laying next to each other. She was all of 20 years old as well.
She's just a baby herself.
And especially her life as a mother. Her crime, you heard testimony that her crime was solely being there. Nothing else. If she had not been there, she would still be alive today. I don't know how to do this. Okay. Well, if I skip through it, I'll just get to another one. Okay. Chris Sr., there's a lot to say about him. Obviously, he was a hard worker. He got up every morning and went and worked at Big Bear Lake all day, building stuff, bulldozing stuff. He was obviously a family man, provided for his family, provided for his son Frankie and Hanna Hazel and Ruger, provided for his former wife Dana and his children Hannah Mae and little Chris, so that they, especially Hannah Mae, could have a home with extra space that was clean and orderly, all in anticipation of the custody battle that was ensuing. You heard about his 4th of July fireworks. Obviously, he grew marijuana. That's not in dispute in this case. And noteworthy as well, that's also not why he was killed. That has nothing to do with this case. As I noted in the beginning, it caused some distraction for the investigation initially because of trying to see if there was any ties with the marijuana. But the reason that he was killed is because he was the patriarch of this family, and they knew that he would, again, figure out who did it and potentially seek vengeance, but also keep in mind that he was one of the original targets, right? Angela suggested that they snitch on him and get him locked up, because that would be taking off the head of the snake, and then Hanna Mae would not have the support that she needed to withstand a custody battle. Obviously, that idea got voted down, but again, that's why he was targeted for these murders. Gary is the only one that had any drugs in his system. We know that he abused cocaine sometimes. We know that he was from Kentucky, and he would come and stay with his cousin, Chris. And when he was with his cousin, Chris, he would go and also work at Big Bear Lake. He was described as goofy, and the defendant himself told you that he went and hunted with him down in Kentucky. Again, his crime was simply being there. He had nothing to do with any of the suspicions that Angela was developing in her mind, or that the Wagners thought were occurring. Kenneth was a hardworking man, a very generous man. You heard that he would get up at 4:30 in the morning and drive over to his brother Chris's house, where he would shower and then drive up to Columbus, Ohio, and work every day, a full day. Would come home and usually get dinner at Giovanni's and then go back to his home. You heard from his daughter Kendra and his son Luke. And Kendra told you that she had talked to him earlier that day, and they both told you that he was very present in their lives and very supportive of them, provided for them, and in pursuing their careers, schooling for both of them. You also heard from Donald Stone. I think that was a very long time ago, but I think his testimony was a little hard to forget. He talked about how generous Kenneth was, and that he would give him, family and non-family alike, anything they needed, anytime they had need. Again, we know why he was killed, and the defendant also told you that he was a very strong guy. The defendant said he considers his own self very stout, but that Kenneth was much stronger than he was. And they knew, again, the closeness that he had to his brother Chris, and that he would figure out what happened. And therefore, that is why they decided that he also had to be killed. Dana was a very loving mother and grandmother. You heard that she was going to watch Brentley the following day because Chelsea had called up Frankie at the last minute and asked if he could watch Brentley so that Chelsea could do her work shift, because the daycare had an illness there. You also heard from Angela's own mouth how close Dana was to her grandchildren, how she was constantly doing things for her grandchildren, taking them shopping or having little cookouts at her house. She was a caretaker. She worked long, hard hours at the nursing home. They had not fully moved in, but you could tell that she kept an orderly home, and that family and faith were very important to her. You hear on one of Jake's recordings where she's telling Sophia to take Daddy and show him throughout the new house that they had just moved into. Obviously trying to raise her children as well as she could. We know that little Chris was grounded at the time, and from his car. So, and having just turned 16, I suspect that was a severe punishment as you could dream of. Again, she was not suspected of doing anything wrong to Sophia at all. She was just there. Now, I would suggest that based on Jake's testimony, they waited until she got there, right? Because they drove by initially and she wasn't there. And so they didn't return until she was there. I have no idea if that was so that she didn't come home mid homicide, or again, whether they had made the decision that she also was going to die. Hanna Mae had just turned 19 years old. You know that she had just given birth to Kylie, who was 5 days old at the time that she was killed. You know that she was the mother of little Sophia, who was 2.5 at the time. And she had just turned 19. She was working She was going to school to become a nurse. She had gotten her GED. She had become involved with Corey Holdren. You heard also his rather emotional testimony about how committed they were to each other, how touched he was by the fact that she sat with him and helped him beat his addiction while he was going through withdrawals, and how much that meant to him because his perception was nobody had ever done anything like that for him before. And he felt that that was a great act of love and sacrifice. He had met with Charlie Gilley, who was the actual father of Kylie. You heard that Hanna found out she was pregnant with Charlie's baby right when she and Corey had just started dating. So Corey met with Charlie.
Fair point, Amelia.
Said,
Fair
okay
point.
if I raise your daughter? And Charlie was okay with that. Charlie's also young, also was not prepared for parenting. So you heard from Corey that he named Kylie, and that he was there at the hospital when she was born and cut her umbilical cord. And clearly he's touched by the relationship that he had with Hanna Mae. We know that Hanna was a loving and proud mother of Sophia. We have text messages from her where she's describing her as her whole world, and obviously refusing to sign any paperwork that the Wagners were putting before her because of her fear that they were trying to do to her what they did to Tabitha, and she was never going to permit that to happen. She also was not as easily manipulated as Tabitha was. Tabitha came from a very broken home and didn't have the support system that Hanna Mae did. And so that turns out to be her crime and why she needed to die. They did not think that she had done anything wrong to Sophia.
You know, Jen,
felt that
the only
when
thing
she
that
was with her,
we know is that they're with
Hanna was
family.
bringing her up against,
Specifically,
people that
which
she shouldn't.
family?
And again,
No, we don't. I think
validity
that the
of those
press,
fears,
the media has
is
done,
questioned.
and
But
everybody
that was their
else
perception.
has done
So
a really
that is why
wonderful job
she
of protecting their
died
privacy.
that night, is because she refused to be manipulated.
Except
by the
for,
Wagners because
I
she
do
was
know
not
that
capable of giving
Bovine
custody
is
to
with
them.
Tabitha. That's all I
And
know.
finally, little Chris, all of 16 years old, just got his driver's license, was very happy and proud of that. Nobody had anything bad to say about him, other than he was the annoying little brother that had to tag along.
Oh, I don't
with
think so,
Hanna Mae
babe. No.
whenever Hanna
No.
Mae went to see Jake when they first started dating. And that, again, was because Chris and Dana didn't want Hanna Mae to be alone with Jake when she would be up there with them. His crime, again, you heard from Angela herself say that she thought that Sophia was red, she thought that she had an odor, and she noticed her touching herself, and she asked her, why do you do that? Asked a 2-year-old, why do you do that? And she said, Chris does it for bubblegum. That's what Angela says the response was. And from that, Angela extrapolates, obviously, this heightened fear that the Wagners have obsessed about. But she extrapolates that maybe little Chris is doing something to Sophia. And so that is the evidence that was used to make the decision to kill him in his sleep. So how do we get to this point where decisions like that are being made? And how do we know that the defendant,
spot on.
Wagner the fourth, is involved?
Yes, let's get to that
Well,
part.
again,
That's
at the
important.
beginning of this case, before you heard any evidence about the homicide, I tried to convey to you as best I could, talking to you about the women in the Wagners' lives. And you must have been wondering then, and maybe still a little bit now, what that has to do with the murders in this case, right? It was almost, let's say, soap opera-ish, but it's like, well, what does the fact that George used to date Tabitha and Jake was with this girl named Beth Ann, and and all that stuff have to do with it. Well, again, I hope that now you have a better feel for why that matters, and why that is important. These issues with the women and children in their lives should never have led to such a drastic result, but it did. And again, I think you got a glimpse when both Jake and Angela testified, somewhat more, I think, with Angela, but how their minds worked when dealing with the women who gave them children, and especially when they lost control of those women.
Could I see counsel up here just a moment? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, holy hell. I wonder what that's about. Let me just point out here that this would be an excellent time for her to go over those relationships, reiterate the testimony, reiterate the control, etc. Right? This would have been a good time. And now she was interrupted. Okay, Charlie, have a good day to you too, babe. Maybe she was interrupted, so maybe she'll go into it, but
We'll start with Tabitha. You heard from Tabitha, but you also heard from other people who had information about the relationship that she had with George and the interplay with the remaining of the family. George started the relationship with Tabitha when she was very young, around 10 or 11. We know that.
Thank you, audio person, for letting us have audio in both ears. Appreciate you.
And that nobody held anybody accountable for that. And again, this becomes a theme in the women who find themselves ensnared in the Wagner's lives. You'll recall that Angela encouraged Tabitha to go lay down with George again when she was 10 or 11.
Yes,
he was upset.
Cement shoes.
Needed consoling because of something a grandparent had.
Day 49 of the trial,
so again,
day 872 of the vest.
Of that
yes.
process where the relationship is a family affair. We know after they were married, Tabitha talked about Angela basically tucking George in at night, rubbing his back, how she would have conversations with her about the type of sex they should or should not be having. We know that they accused Tabitha of being abusive, not sexually, but abusive, and capable or at risk of being sexually abusive just from the mere fact that she herself was abused. They accused her of stealing from them. They accused her of poisoning them with food. Again, these are all recurring themes that we see over and over with each of the women who stayed with the Wagners. We know she was not allowed to have contact with her family. Obviously, her offender, that makes perfect sense, but the remainder of her family, it does not. We know, especially once they learned that she had been unfaithful, that was a transgression that she committed. She was unfaithful after she and George were married. But you heard that they took her phone from her and factory reset it, and Angela kept the phone. Again, this family involvement in all of that process. We know that she had not seen her mother for over a year. We also know that on the night that she literally fled for her life, that George hit her and Angela threw a 2x4 at her. Angela told you that herself. And she told Tabitha that she was going to get her gun. Again, this was a family affair. When Tabitha makes it outside, she said that she bit George because his arm was up and blocking her. Once she gets outside, she hides under a truck. And she says they're out there with flashlights looking for her. And we heard that from Angela that Jake and Angela went up to the neighbor's house in Hannah's car to see if maybe she had wandered over there seeking safety or trying to make a phone call. When they couldn't find her, they came back and Jake and George got into a truck and went to try to find her. And they did find her pedaling on a bicycle, flat tires, trying to make it to the gas station so that she could call her mother. And we know this happened not just through Tabitha's testimony to you and not just through the parts of it that Jake and Angela corroborate, but also Hanna May herself corroborated this. And how do we know that? We know that because she called Chelsea Robinson. Remember Chelsea's testimony that she got this terrifying call from Hanna May saying that she didn't have much time to talk, that they had taken her phone and she was using one of their phones. And she said they told her that they would cut off her legs if she tried to leave. That's what Hanna said to Chelsea while this was happening. She said they had chased Tabitha out of the house, that Tabby got out and Angela got a gun and took off after her, and that Angela and Jake and George were looking for her. She told Chelsea not to call her back because they told her not to reach out to anyone. Of course, Chelsea was very terrified about all this, asked her if she was okay, and Hanna asked her not to tell anybody. And you remember from Chelsea's testimony that she said she did ultimately tell Chris Sr. about what was going on and how that upset Hanna May because Hanna May was still with Jake and stayed with him for a few months after this, and how that came between them. At some point, I expect, and I think we kind of heard this from the questioning, the concept that, well, they didn't kill Tabitha, right? They went about getting custody the right way. They went to the courts. But again, let's review that. First of all, Hanna also, you will see in her communications with Tabitha, she talked about that night and she said she didn't know what would happen if they had managed to get her back into the house. So that was Hanna's concerns, is that something bad was going to happen if they had gotten Tabitha back into the house. Instead, she fled. But what did they do then? They go to the gas station and they called the police. George called the police at the behest of Jake and Angela, because the concern was that Tabitha would report George hitting her, Angela threatening to get a gun, them chasing her, etc. And that would not bode well for custody. So instead, they beat her to the punch, more or less, even though she herself did not call the police. She merely called her mother to come and get her for help. But again, they had no problem falsifying a police report to say that she was the aggressor. There's 4 of them, 1 of her. And so she ends up with a disorderly conduct charge that is amongst your exhibits that apparently she showed up and paid some bond forfeiture for subsequent to that. But again, this was what gives them leverage in the almighty custody battle, right? And when does that custody battle happen? Within 2 weeks, there is a typed up, prepared separation or dissolution.
Okay, Jen, have a great
where she's
day.
given away.
I hope the re-accessing your port goes. I know those can be painful. Thank you for thanking me. You're very welcome. I'm happy to do it.
Well, we know it's not true because if you look at the language of the agreement, it says that visitation will be reasonable and it will be agreed to by the parties. Silly her thought that that meant they would discuss it and they would reach a mutual agreement. She had no idea that within a few months that was not going to be the case. She did not want bovine at that time because she was living with her former perpetrator at that time, her stepfather and her mother. But she wanted to be able to get him more once she got on her feet and got a job. And how do we know that's true? Well, because in your evidence, in your evidence that you will have back in the jury room, you will see letters, and we talked about this. I had Tabitha read these letters to you. You will see letters from Tabitha to George in March of 2015. Within 2 months of going to court and signing that dissolution, she is telling him that she has seen an attorney, and you heard her say that she consulted with an attorney, and he said that she should try to work it out, without going through the courts and the expense of the courts, if she could. And so she sent him not one letter, but 2 letters, one by certified mail and one by direct mail. And we know he got them because they're still in his belongings when we go up to State Route 41. So clearly, she did not intend to permanently give up her son in that situation, or else 2 months later, she wouldn't be knocking at his door. And you'll see that she also left him a note saying that she was going to start exercising visitation every Wednesday, and he wasn't there. I'll be back next Wednesday. I'd like to drop off an Easter basket, etc. So again, the fact that they take advantage of her. She's unrepresented, she's young, and she believes them when they said that this was just a temporary ordeal. You also know that until they are arrested in 2018, they are still working as a family. And again, I think that's the important part of this, right? It's not just George doing this. It's Jake and Angela going to the neighbors. It's Jake and George going to the gas station. It's Jake and Angela suggesting to George they call the police. Then George calls the police. Then there's, this insistence that it be supervised visitations. Until they get arrested in 2018, they are still working as a family, all to make sure that Tabitha never gets any unsupervised visits with Bullvine. And frankly, hardly any supervised visits, as it were. You heard her talk about it. You saw the messages from between Hanna Mae and Tabitha, where she's talking about how every time she wants to see him, he's, quote, got to work. And, Hanna suggesting, well, Angela's there, surely she could supervise. You just can tell that he is not accommodating to her. They moved to Alaska so that her child is definitely away from her. And when they get back, you heard talk about this. This is on the T3, the wire recordings, where they're talking about how they have to stay low until June 7th of 2018 so that George can claim abandonment. How about, that Tabitha wants to see her child. How about you just let her see the child instead of trying to put this wench between she and her son, which can't really make the child feel good either, right? And we know that Jake was having Hanna get information on Tabitha. So again, this whole family effort. We know that initially George was monitoring Tabitha's Facebook. He wants you to believe that was after they split up. She gave him her password, even though she told you she's never given her password. And it doesn't even make sense. Why, after you leave, would you, the night that you flee for your life and you never ever go back, why would you then hand out a password? Regardless, you heard from both Jake and Angela that first George was monitoring the Facebook, and then Jake and Angela also would participate, mainly Angela, but that as she was getting information, she was sharing it with all of them, with Jake and with George. We also know that there were screenshots of all these things. First, when we're there at State Route 41, we have paper print-offs of lots of pages, Facebook pages, of Tabitha and her mother, Tess, and her sister. Then when we get the laptop from Montana, we see thousands of screenshots, again, from that. So this was a thing that was ongoing daily. And again, it makes no sense. You know, George wants you to believe that, oh, I just monitored it for a little while, and then I told my mom, stop doing that. Really? Because she's monitoring to make sure that Tabitha's not going to wage a custody battle to see if she's talking about hiring an attorney or whatever. And also trying to get dirt on her to use if there is a custody battle. So again, we'll talk about that a little bit later when we're talking about the reasonableness of what certain witnesses say versus the defendant.
You need
But
to put the
which
defendant
matches
in
up,
that
which is
home,
more reasonable.
all those homes,
Do you
one
believe that
home.
he was just monitoring for her faithfulness, or do you believe that
We get it.
Jake
George and Angela
George
and
spoke all to
George,
combat
Angela, and
any
Jake were all
potential
snoops.
custody
They
battle?
monitored. They were control freaks. We get that, but that does
Angela
not put
also
George
freely
in
admitted
those
to you
homes.
that,
Please put him in one of those homes. It
and
just needs to be
quite
one.
honestly, Tabitha didn't know. When she testified for you, she thought, she had a hunch that Angela was the one, or George or Jake, you know, had called the State Highway Patrol on her because she got stopped on her way back to her home after visiting with Bullvine at their house. And she just found it ironic that some, you know, state trooper would just pull her over randomly and say that they got an anonymous call that she had drugs in her car. Again, that's for custody battle purposes, right? So again, another false report through law enforcement in order to thwart any custody attempts. Now, Angela denies doing anything to the infant child of Tabitha. Maybe it was somebody else in the house. I don't know. But again, it seems ironic that after she visits there, then her child becomes very ill and has substance in her body. At that time, she was still monitoring Tabitha's account, and there was conversations that Tabitha was having saying that just because she was not faithful, she was told by her attorney, is not a reason to show that she's unfit, that there has to be something more. And so this became something more, right? The State Highway Patrol, and potentially, you know, her own child. Again, if they are
Cement,
willing to
hold on, I'm
kill
going
8 people,
to turn her down a little bit.
then I don't think it's that far-fetched.
Here's the deal. Physically, they don't have proof, honestly, of anybody really being, any of the Wagners being in the home. They do have shell casings that are unique to specific firearms. That is true, that were traced back. But all of that really points to Billy and Jake. None of it really points to George. They have got to put, other than Jake saying that George was there. But Jake has changed his story. So, listen, I don't know. I have a bad feeling in my tummy. I'm not even going to lie about this one. This one has me a little nervous for the outcome.
She was different in that regard.
Heal.
Try to dominate her time, and you will see that.
Sorry, you guys.
In the conversations between Jake and Hanna, and that was this 83 pages, I think. Some of those are cover sheets, but it had the various conversations between them and how he wanted her to always come to his place. He would never come to her place, just that sort of thing. And she's talking about how her family doesn't see Sophia nearly as much as Jake's family does, etc. So again, you see that, and you see that in her conversation with Tabitha again about the control that the Wagners exert over you. Ultimately, Jake chokes Hanna, and she calls her father to come pick her up, which he does, and that ends their relationship. I would point out again that I find it interesting that George said during his testimony that he wasn't home when this happened. He didn't know why it happened. He had no idea, because he's trying to convince us, of course, that he was oblivious to any problems between Jake and Hanna, right? And why is that important? Because the problems between Jake and Hanna are why they killed Hanna and her whole family. So he's trying to act like this is just that one drama that he did not know about. However, yeah, they probably don't have my glasses, but I'll try my best. Hanna says to Tabby in May of 2015, yeah.
I don't
Jake
have a good
choked
feeling
me,
about it at
George
all,
brought
cement
up the
shoes,
fact
at
that I
all.
got raped
I'm
and
very
nothing
worried about
was done about
this.
it. But I never told anyone because the person who done it to me told me he would go away for a long time. If I could change time, I would. But now everybody knows it happened. So again, this family affair, right? Jake is choking Hanna, and George is there talking about the fact that Hanna was raped and nobody did anything about it, which again, as we know, is a big red flag for the Wagners. If you were molested and you didn't do anything about it, then you are a danger to Sophia and Bowline. And that's just the way they think. After that, you start seeing the journal entries by Angela, various things, time when George and Jake went and picked up Sophia to get her medicine because she had a bellyache, you know, just documenting all those things. You see that Jake tries to get Hanna to sign his 50-50 papers, but Hanna won't sign anything. And not only does she say to Tabitha's mother that she won't sign papers ever, she says that to Jake too, to the point that the attorney tells him that he does not stand a chance of getting full custody of his daughter in Ohio because they were never married and Hannah's not an unfit mother. So armed with that, and again, due to the monitoring of Facebook that they were doing as a family of Tabitha and Tess, her mother, that's when they see the message from Hanna Mae when she says, I won't sign papers ever. It won't happen. They'll have to kill me first. Angela and Jake both say that this message was shared and talked about amongst the three of them. And then that's when the plotting begins. We know that in January, that was December of 2015, we know that in January of 2016, they had made the decision that they were going to kill them. And you start seeing the purchases corresponding to that timeline, where they're starting to buy items to build silencers and such. We also know that Jake had Samantha Staley spying on Hanna because she lived close to Corey Holdren. And so he was having her, and you saw those text messages and you heard from Samantha, and that she stopped doing it when Angela called. Again, this family affair. Beth Ann, then, last but not least, in many ways, she was the linchpin in this case, because when we were starting to listen to them in 2018, after they had come back to Ohio and Beth Ann was with them, we heard conversations, especially immediately before we had started renewed our investigative work, such that they would be a little more careful about what they were saying and doing. And we simply knew then that our theory of the case was correct, right? Again, it's hard to imagine that 8 people would lose their lives over such a flimsy motive, but it's true, right? You heard from the people who made the decision and how they made the decision. Right away, we hear George and Angela being very upset with Jake because Jake had the audacity to tell Sophia that she could call Beth Ann mom, because after all, she was her stepmother. And Jake had apparently explained to Sophia that Angela was actually her grandmother and not her mother, which was terrible as far as George and Angela were concerned, because Bullvine was thoroughly convinced that Angela was his mother. And now, according to George, he was going to have to tell Bullvine the quote, cold, hard truth. And you heard those recordings, and I would certainly invite you to listen to them again. But where he is, extremely upset with Jake. And again, just parroting exactly the same things that Angela says to Jake. Again, then George tries to convince us on the stand that, well, no, Bullvine knew that Tabitha was his mom. Well, then what was the big deal? What truth did he have to explain to him, if that in fact was the truth? And quite honestly, it would have been nice and polite of them to let them know that Angela was not his mother and that Tabitha actually was his mother. And that's where we drop back into their lives. Then we also hear conversations between George and Angela talking about Beth Ann and all the conspiracy theories that they had as to her. And then we hear again conversations between Jake and George, and this is in the truck when they're driving together, and George is just going off. And in fact, State's Exhibit 23, and why don't I have XXEE? I'll give you the number later. But it is call number 502, and this was the lengthier call, but it is a call where George is absolutely losing his mind with Jake and telling him that Beth Ann has to get out of the house, that he does not trust her, that he does not feel safe having Bullvine in the same house as her, that he does not feel that Sophia is safe, that Jake is falling down on the job. He's not putting Sophia first. He's not making her a priority. Goodness sakes, when he gets home from a week of driving, Beth Ann knocks Sophia over just to get to him before Sophia does. And tells him that she's leaving the door unlocked, or not leaving the door unlocked, rather. The door's locked, and allegedly Beth Ann is getting up in the middle of the night and unlocking the front door just to put them all at risk. And he's worried that she's going to kidnap the kids and take them to a cult in Texas, that she's going to molest them. He says that they can move out, but if they move out, they have to leave Sophia with George and Angela, because Jake's not going to protect Sophia.
Yeah, it feels like that a little bit, doesn't it, Amelia?
An extremely telling conversation. Again, this was one of those early ones. And he's, speaking freely, if you will. And it demonstrates everything that, if only we had recordings back in 2016 when they were leading up to commit these offenses, because I would strongly invite you to listen to that recording again and ask yourselves if that is the voice or the demeanor or the attitude or the approach of somebody who would ever sit one out, who would ever not be involved, if Angela was saying the same things then about Hanna and little Chris and Frankie and all the other people that were in the mix then whenever Sophia went to the Rhodens. If Angela was saying the same things then, you know that George was hearing it and parroting it back and feeling just as strongly. You heard Angela talk about how she had a conversation with just Jake and George in the kitchen, which is where I think everything in their family happens, and asked them if they were sure about what they were doing, meaning the homicides. And she said none of them wanted to do it. They were all, quote, reluctant, but they knew they had no other choice. They had to do this to protect Sophia. So listen to this phone call, or conversation rather, between Jake and George. because it embodies exactly that. George is not going to let anything happen to Sophia, to the point that he's going to keep Sophia from Jake himself, because Jake's not protecting from big bad, you met her, Beth Ann, Elizabeth Armour, at the time was going by Beth. So again, complete flimsy allegations in regards to Beth Ann, right? Similar flimsy allegations in regard to the Rhodens, but they whipped themselves into a frenzy. And if anything, you can tell in this phone call or conversation that it's George and Angela that are leading the charge. It's not Jake and Angela. It is George and Angela. And Jake tries to convince him that he's lost his mind, that George and Angela are paranoid, and that they're going on a bunch of what ifs and whatnots, I think is what he called it, and just keep spinning themselves into a tizzy, which is exactly what was happening. But it was happening with both Angela and George. And again, like I said, if you listen to that, I think it captures the essence. Then what do we know about what they do with her? Well, they accuse her of being sexually abusive, right? Although Sophia recanted and said that she just said it because she doesn't like her or something, or Jake, never believed it. Jake never believed it. Of course, George and Angela did. They accused her of stealing money. You'll see in...
I'm going to turn you down, Miss Canepa. I don't want to be rude. What you need to be doing, ma'am, when you're talking about those phone calls, those conversations, those recordings of George and Angela, is pointing out the difference in the conversation that's taking place versus his testimony on the stand. Lord. Hopefully she does that.
The fake Facebook, which you will have in your exhibits as well. And you'll see on the fake Facebook, it says, coming back from Michigan, working at the Holiday Inn or whatever. That's not exactly, I think it might have been a Super 8 hotel. But just spinning this completely fake information so that anybody that was looking for her would be kind of thrown off the track. Same thing with Beth Ann. She was not allowed to tell her family where she lived. We know that Jake and Angela confronted her again.
100% cement shoes. 100%.
Jake was giving her the benefit of the doubt, or saying that he didn't know if she did or not, but that if he ever found out that she had done it. You remember this? The Lucille bat from Walking Dead. He's talked very vividly about making a Lucille bat, stringing her up in the barn and beating her to death with the bat, and then burning the barn down to the ground, so her family would never find her. You know that she called what used to be her friend that she had lived with in Alaska, who was former law enforcement, and he talked to Jake and then got her back on the phone and said, oh, he didn't mean it, minimized it, right? But at that moment, she knew that she needed to get out of there. She knew because she told you the things they were accusing her of, they had said Tabitha did. And she knew what they thought about Tabitha. So she knew she needed to get, while the getting was good, right? And she talked to you about how basically it was this dance where George was pressuring and Angela was pressuring Jake to get Beth out. And Jake was slowly caving to that idea. And simultaneously, Beth Ann's trying to convince them to come up with this plan where, oh, maybe you can tell them I'm a risk because of BCI, so I'll go to college, whatever. They're both trying to get out. And she does ultimately get out. Before she gets out, though, she writes in her journal. And again, that journal that, by the way, George texts to Angela. So again, the idea that he ever is not in the middle of the fray is preposterous.
There you go. There you go.
The journal was found. George has it on his phone. He texts it to Angela. And in that is an incredibly, again, astute observations by Beth Ann. She was a very quick study. In less than 3 months of living with them, she had reached, had all the information she needed and made her exit. But she talks about the controlling nature of Angela and this family. So I would invite you also to look at that. One of the things, and again, this is, the idea that George wants to distance himself from this family. Oh, we didn't have family meetings. Well, you might call it a family meeting, but I don't call it a family meeting. Well, ironically, they do. Angela does. Angela says, when you get home, we have to have a family meeting. That's what they're called. And in this same call, George says to Jake, the family has spoken. The family has spoken, Jake. Not me, I'm telling you. Not my mom. The family has spoken. Mom doesn't want her on the complex. So again, George is very much in this, very much dictating, very much making determinations with the life of his brother and his brother's wife. He was married. That didn't matter. We're getting rid of her. So again,
that's where I'm at, Amelia. She done lost me 72 ago.
Why I find myself talking to you about the women in the Wagner's lives and the children and all the back and forth battles and crazy suspicions that they had and what they did when they were faced with those suspicions. Each one of these women, Tabitha, Hanna, and Beth Ann, had been abused as children, and nothing had been done about it, which again is a big red flag for the Wagners. They tried to control them as much as they could. For Beth Ann, the very first night of their honeymoon, they consummate the marriage, and then it's, give me your password, give me your social security, give me your bank account, give me everything. Give me all the keys to your life. Sync the phone with them, was GPS tracking her, all those things.
Yes, all those things.
At some point,
you've established that they're control freaks.
Potentially,
I promise. I believe that. I totally believe you.
Angela talking about sex with them. Why is that important? That's
Please,
important.
We don't need to relive this.
Because there is nothing that happens in that household that is not a group decision, right? That at least Angela is not involved in. Okay, so Beth Ann talks about it in her journal, that the most private of affairs she is involved in. They are always accused of being abusive, or at least likely to become abusive or permit abuse, accuses them of stealing, accuses them of poisoning, demands that they relinquish all control of their children. Even with Beth Ann, she had to sign the prenuptial that she wouldn't, try to get custody or anything if there was a divorce. And they're willing to resort to crimes if the women don't cooperate, right? So we know with Tabitha, assaults aside, right? Keep in mind the vividness of Tabitha's testimony to you was when he hit her, she said, you just signed your divorce papers. Good for her. Good for her with her upbringing, that she was able to recognize that as wrong and had the strength to leave at that time. The violence aside, you know, Jake choking Hanna. I know he describes it as holding her with his arm here on her collarbone. She's certainly
Hey, Heather, whatever. Good to see ya.
All over her conversations that you'll have. That aside,
Yeah.
you know,
Okay.
the falsifications, the Facebook hacking, you know, stalking them, and not just Tabitha, right? Certainly Tabitha's not give any passwords away. We never heard anything about that. But
You
Tabitha
have
was
got
very
to tie
clear.
this
Never
together in a much
George
neater
or
bow,
anybody else
ma'am.
gave her password, and they did not have permission to be in Facebook. That's a crime. You'll see it in your indictment. So, you know, calling the state highway patrol on a false, I mean, wasting resources. Again, they are not afraid to resort to crimes, and of course, ultimately, the crimes that they committed in this case. Spying on them electronically.
You've already covered that.
Violence or
Why don't you
violence,
cover
compliance or control? Again,
the arsons? Because
one of
those
the
would be
conversations between Jake
fantastic.
and Hanna is a girl emoji with pointed at her head.
Oh my.
And she says,
That's not irony, by the way.
So again,
That's not irony.
very strong
But
awareness by the girls that
if you want to tie George to this, point out the final act of arson on Bethel Hill,
obviously Angela threatened
where
her
George
son,
took
assaulted her,
his and Tabitha's and Bullvine's belongings out of that
her,
home prior to it going up in flames. You've got, oh, bless it, I can't.
and
Oh crap. Yeah, let me turn her up. I'm going for a break, but I'll be in the chat.
Did the sex abuse that
Oh, sweet Jesus.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is argument, so I'm going to hold your objection.
they tell her that they will beat her to death. And, you know, she denies, of course, ever sexually abusing anybody.
Obviously, trigger warning.
Sophia, and she talked.
Let me put it
about
across
how
the
hard it was
thing because
disprove that. And again, the whole family affair, the fact that they are all involved in each other's business, that this very much is a Jake, George,
47
and
triggers later.
Angela
Sorry, you
at
guys.
260 Peterson Road. You know that Billy was off living at the Flying W. We know from the tower dump that Ms. Forney gave us that on the night of the homicides was the first night that Billy ever spent the night there. So it is, by and large, Jake, George, and Angela at 260 Peterson working together and making these decisions. You know, using different addresses. They had Beth Ann use a different address so that Tabitha wouldn't find out where they lived.
Bless
They
it.
each used the Oak Hill address of Rita. That would be the farm that Rita had to sell to pay for her attorney fees in this case. And so they used that, even though they never stepped foot in there, they never lived there for one day or 1 hour. They knew they were going to 52 Havner Lane because that was Angela's now.
Why don't you talk about the conversation between Jake and Angela, where Angela says that George and Jake have been running the show for far too long? Point that out. Jeez Louise. Okay, for reals, I need.
Angela's upset. Beth Ann is going into town. She's going to work at some place. Can't remember now the location, but some of Tabitha's family apparently works in that same general area. And the idea is that
Yay, oh,
and it's talked about this
so much. I did have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving as well. Thank you so much for your support. I appreciate that.
With Hanna.
Okay, now for reals, I'm going for a smoke.
We know that George is there on 2 of those occasions. And one of those occasions, again, he says that he didn't know that Jake was making a recording. But you can listen to it and make that determination for yourself, because it sounds an awful lot like he's making that comment so that it's captured on the recording, because when Sophia gets into the car, he confronts his little niece and says, why are you so filthy? Don't they know how to give you a bath? Again, why on earth you would say that to a 2.5-year-old child, unless you were doing what these recordings were meant to capture, which is negative. Reviews regarding Hanna and her parenting. He also is in the background on one of those, and you can hear him saying, hurry up, get out of here before Chris and them come up here, and then very urgently trying to get him, Jake, to not drive past Chris's house. George couldn't explain that to you. I can't explain it either. But again, very much involved, very present, very much aware of what's going on between Hanna and Jake, because he's with them all the time. He works with them all the time. Again, he wants to put that distance between them, but that distance does not exist. They live together. At the border, he says he and his brother run the house at Peterson Road, that they take turns making decisions. Well, it is when I asked him about it on the stand, and he confirms it.
Well, council approaches from. Overrule the objection. As I indicated before, the arguments of each attorney are not evidence. You must rely on your collective memories to what the evidence is. I'm going to permit each attorney to argue what they feel, within bounds of reasonableness, what they feel that you should find that the evidence is. But you'll have to rely on your collective memories as to what the evidence is. Let me also say that the order of which we do things is a matter of long standing. The prosecutor goes first in these arguments. The defense counsel will have an equal opportunity to present argument after the state, and then the state has an opportunity to present rebuttal arguments. So you may proceed with your argument.
Thank you, Your Honor. You may recall that when the defendant was on the stand, I asked him about that because he was saying how controlling his mother was. And I confronted him with the fact that that's not what he said at the border. That at the border, he rebuked that idea that his mother was controlling in response to the agent saying, oh, your mother is so controlling, she probably masterminded this whole homicide, etc. To which he very quickly came to her defense and said she wasn't controlling, that he and his brother owned that home. She lived with them because she had medical conditions and babysits for the kids, and that he and his brother Jake run the house. This is what he said at the border, okay? That was before he came to you and sat here and needed to say something different because he no longer wants to be in cahoots with his brother, right? He no longer wants that relationship with his brother, because if he has that relationship, he knows that you'll know that they were all involved in this together. Okay. Again, asking other people to spy on them. So again, why do we go over this? Basically because it gives us a bird's eye into the dynamics of the home. And like I said, Beth Ann was really the linchpin in that we were hearing conversations, and then her journal just kind of said what we thought all along, right? They're all together when it comes to the safety and welfare of Sophia and Bullvine, and they will do anything to protect them. Okay, so the second part of that question was, how do we know the defendant was involved? Well, I've already kind of touched on some of the things that I think are indicative, just from a common sense. The judge is going to tell you that you should use your reason and common sense. You don't leave that at the door. There's no magical, mystical standard we use here when deciding this case. It's tests that you use in your own lives every day in deciding whether or not something adds up or makes sense. Unbelievable.
No, you really haven't given any, you've not touched on anything even remotely in the vicinity of the fact that he was there. Please, for the love of Pete, tie this together already, ma'am.
Have the same weight as direct evidence. Again, based on the quality of that evidence, based on how you believe it. But for instance,
Oh, excuse me. Hey,
5,
5, 6, 7, 8. Good to see you. Let me say it right. 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes.
That's circumstance. Very strong evidence, almost as strong as if you saw it with your own 2 eyes when it was actually snowing. Unfortunately, you might see some of that in the near future. So we'll talk about the circumstantial evidence in this case because there's a lot of it. The ballistic evidence, the shoe evidence, the silencer, the purchases they were making, the custody documents that they forged. There is a lot of.
When will you be talking about this, ma'am?
Almost as good as us actually being there and seeing them commit these crimes. We also have direct evidence.
Lost it. Okay, I'll be right back. Hold on, I got to mute.
When we first arrested them in this case. And the direct evidence is testimony of witnesses who were actually there. And this brings us back to, you'll also remember in Wagner, we had some lengthy discussion about being the captain of the high sea, being responsible for the law enforcement on the waters where there's pirates who are taking in perfectly innocent civilians and having them walk the plank and plunge to their death. And the only people that we have to find out what actually happened on that pirate ship are other pirates, right? So we'll talk about that, and we'll talk to you about the instruction that you're going to receive on how to weigh this evidence of Jake and Angela. But you will also be getting an instruction on how to weigh the testimony of any witness, right? You know, things like the opportunity they had to see what they're talking about, the reasonableness of their testimony, their demeanor, their frankness or their lack of frankness, their accuracy of their memory. Again, these are, it's great that they're written down and we fall back on that, but these are things you guys use in your everyday life, right? Does it make sense what they're telling you?
I gotta say, Corky, I'm kind of with you, babe. I'm very worried about this. I'm not so sure the state made their case.
I mean, the believability of it certainly comes into play there. We also have what the court will refer to as other acts evidence. And
all I heard was snow, honestly.
In that, you will be instructed that you cannot use it, they would say, for propensity. Okay, so basically, so I committed a bunch of thefts. Just because I committed a bunch of thefts doesn't make me a murderer, right? Nor does it even mean that I committed another theft, a subsequent theft, right? So you can't say, oh, well, just because you are a bad guy or you've committed crimes means you're likely to have done this too, right? But you can use other acts evidence. So the information about all of the crimes that they did commit together as a family, right? We've heard about that.
Talk about that.
Pretty awful, right? Pretty awful way to raise your children. So that you're teaching them how to commit crimes, making games of it, right? And punishing them, right? Giving them $1. I don't remember. I think the $1 was for the canvas. Could be wrong about that.
Probably not a good idea to say you don't remember. Holy Jesus.
Remember which one it was? Before your dad did, then you lost your 4-wheeler. And the other game was you got $1 every time you spotted either the officer or the camera, right? Now at a very young age that started. And it progressed. And he taught him to pick locks, and you taught them to steal fuel. And things
Yep.
they needed. And
Jen,
you
I gotta agree with you,
thought
babe.
about
I gotta
the
agree with
stuff
you.
They needed on the farm to keep the farm going, right? Steal loads out of tractor trailers, right? There's discussion, diapers or boots? Which one are we going to steal? Open it up, see what's in there. Is it worth the risk? Is it worth the effort to steal it? So, and the arsons, right? The arsons for insurance fraud purposes that they committed together. Again, just because they did that does not mean that they progressed to murder, right? Certainly not. But what it does show us is this behavioral fingerprint, and they'll talk about that. About how they function as a team. How they function in one of the charges we as a criminal enterprise, right? They are out there. I mean, George talked about then after, you know, they would buy cars cheap.
Sweet Jesus.
You're doing what?
Approach what? He said mischaracterization. That's what the objection was about. Even with this trash audio, even I heard that. This is very frustrating to me. I need to. No, okay. I'm going to talk about this cement shoes more in depth, but right before, well, let me start again.
In court, you have the evidence.
Okay. Right after Peacock released the trailer for the Casey Anthony docuseries, okay, Vinnie Politan, who you know I adore, he talked about it, but he had the judge who presided over Casey Anthony's trial, and he was talking about something very specific as a reason why he felt that the jury found Casey Anthony not guilty. And I'm going to talk about that, but I just want to keep it under my hat as much as I can, because obviously I just told you where to go find it. But I'm going to talk about that.
He needed money, and they would wreck the truck, and they both get money, and they were supposed to split the money in half. I think maybe that didn't happen. But he was all proud that this was the first time that he had committed a crime without the help of his family. Never mind that Chris is his uncle and Jake is his brother, but he meant specifically George or Billy and Angela. So again, the fact that they commit these crimes as a family and similar patterns, right? For the arsons, they know in advance they're going to do it. They come up with the idea, right? Then they prepare for it by moving the belongings out of the home so they don't.
You know who Vinnie Politan is.
And, you know, there was
Samantha.
people about the, you know, one picture of Angela's that always survived every fire, you know. So planning and then committing the offense, again, together. Jake says that he and George were inside the house when the turkey went into a fire and set the fire. And Tabitha told you that was her belief as well.
I thought it was a chicken, not a turkey.
George obviously denies that. He said that he was out working on his truck when that happened and that he was against it. And, but he knew it was going to happen, so he did participate in getting the stuff out of his stuff and Tabitha's stuff out of the house. And then
that's the part where your voice should be higher, the volume
to cover things up.
Should be louder.
Again,
that's
that
important.
Working as a unit. Angela talked about being a lookout, right? When he was stealing fuel the one time. And, you know, again, so they're taught to spot surveillance cameras. They're taught to spot law enforcement. Is taught to work as a team. So again, those things you are allowed to consider just for his identity as a part of this criminal enterprise and a part of this conspiracy. And later we'll talk a little bit more.
He's
about
a long time one of
um,
Court TV's first correspondents. Cement shoes. You gotta Google him, babe, because I can't right now.
Again, you'll get.
You know how much I love to Google and throw up
the same. So
an
let's
overlay,
talk about the circumstantial evidence,
but I can't
specifically
right now.
in this case, that says that George Wagner participated in these crimes. They're before you today. And again, keep in mind, and I said I will talk to you about complicity probably towards the end when we're reviewing the actual charges with you. But he doesn't have to be the person that actually pulled the trigger, right? You heard that Jake Wagner pled to 8 counts of aggravated murder because he pulled the trigger as to 5, according to him, but he was complicit in the remaining 3. You heard Angela Wagner say that she also was guilty of 8 counts of aggravated murder because she was complicit in it, because she knew what they were going to do. She aided and abetted them.
Yes, Cement, that's the problem. Mm-hmm.
She helped them cover up the crimes afterwards, tried to help them cover up the crimes ahead of time by buying shoes that, we would consider throwaway shoes. That
right,
never
but talk about what
normally wear
George did.
Would not be tied back to them. So again, she didn't even go up there.
Put those shoes on George's feet.
In the complicity instructions that you don't even have to be present in order to be complicit in a crime, right? So, and certainly, she pled guilty to 4 counts of aggravated burglary, and that's what caused all that confusion when she wrote her letter to Frederica, basically saying, "Don't believe everything you see on TV." Like, I didn't go into those homes, and my plea makes it appear that I did. Likewise, I pled guilty to those gun specifications, even though I never had a gun on my person that night. But again, you were complicit because you knew what was going to happen. You knew what they were going to go do. And you aided and abetted them. The shoes certainly are a very strong piece of circumstantial evidence. Keep in mind that from I won't say day 1, but shortly thereafter, you heard the testimony from Suzanne Elliott, who works for BCI, about the initial findings at the crime scene, from the crime scene, right? That there were shoe prints left in blood that they knew had to belong to whoever committed these offenses, or at least 1 or 2 of the individuals that committed these offenses. You heard that she figured out what shoes they were, and that she ultimately figured out that we had 2 different sizes, a size 10.5 and a size 11. And she told you, make sure I get this right, because these item numbers versus evidence numbers. So item 21, which is it's these 2, 23 and 47. You guys remember this? Those are the size 11s. And then 24 is the 10.5. So you have 2 of the size 11s in the crime scene in blood. And you heard from both Suzanne Elliott and Mr. Boziak, who reached the same conclusions across the board. Those were their findings as to scene 1. And I think Ms. Elliott actually gave us more detail, mostly because I don't want to belabor anything for you guys.
Oh, that ship has sailed there, babe.
And that the blood pattern on the shoe was different too, right? So, the size 10.5 had a different pattern of blood on the bottom of the shoe, where the blood stuck because they stepped, different. than the size 11. So that was an additional way for them to tell that these were two different shoes.
Right. Put the shoes on George's feet.
Thank goodness they bought two different size shoes that day. So we know we have a size 10 and a half and a size 11 inside that crime scene.
Sweet
in blood.
Jesus.
And then we go to State Route 41 and we find a receipt for those shoes. And you've heard testimony from Special Agent Jenkins. You heard from Ms. Eveslage. Maybe that was the third time you heard from her. But she went back to the command post and looked up that date and time, and sure enough, pulls up Angela Wagner buying those shoes. We had collected the video ahead of time. We told you about that because we knew for sure it was this shoe. So we had video footage of anybody who had purchased those shoes in a 50-mile radius recently, right? Because one of the other things that they were able to tell about the shoe is that it had no wear on it. So it had to be a new shoe because there was no RAC, I think,
Put
randomly
the
acquired.
shoe on George's
when you
foot.
things, I won't show you the bottom of my shoe. But it didn't have any of those. And it was very pristine shoe prints, which you don't get if the shoe's been worn a while because the things, the parts of the shoe and the sole, the texture that makes the prints gets worn off.
Right. We know how shoes
So
work.
we knew all that. And here we have them buying these shoes on April 7th, 2 weeks prior to the homicides. Angela goes in and buys these shoes. We have the receipt. Special Agent Jenkins goes to a Walmart, pulls up the SKU on that.
I'm curious how this
Match.
is going to, what
Exactly
changes
the
will be
same shoe.
made for Billy Wagner's trial
Again, a size
next
10
year.
and a size 11.
Great. What size does George
So we
wear?
know that they are in there. Now, couple that with Angela's statement at the border, which you got to hear.
Yes. Mhm.
Um,
What size shoe? Hi. Yes, Carmen, it is. Welcome. Yes, it's today. This is
I
live
can't remember.
occurring right now.
But she was questioned about her statement there, and she indicated that she had bought the shoes for her boys.
Mm-hmm.
She claims.
You may proceed. Again, ladies and gentlemen, this is argument of counsel. Defense counsel given equal opportunity.
She said that she bought the shoes for her boys and that she threw them
here
away
we
the
go.
same day because they didn't like them because they were the type of shoes that Pawpaw would wear. When I asked her who Pawpaw was, she indicated it was Bob Wagner.
What
who is Billy.
size shoe does George Washington
So,
Wagner the
we know
fourth
now
wear?
That's our circumstantial evidence before we ever get to the direct evidence of Jake and Angela and what they say about the shoes, right?
Thank you, Corky. That's where I'm at.
Angela Wagner buying 2 pairs of shoes. She says for her 2 boys.
Right.
And we know that both of those shoes are in the crime scenes.
Put the shoe on the defendant's foot.
Evidence. The next pieces of circumstantial evidence that we get are the ballistic evidence, right? So we do a search warrant out at Peterson Road on the day that they vacate the premises to go to Alaska for a couple weeks or a week while they're scoping it out. And we find shell casings, cartridge casings in the driveway at 260 Peterson Road. And they match the cartridge casings that were left behind in scenes 2, where Frankie and Hanna Hazel are, and scene 3, where Dana and Hannah Mae and little Chris are. It's a positive match, meaning it's the exact same gun. Fired the cartridges that we found at Peterson Road are was the same gun that killed Hanna Hazel, Frankie, Dana, and Hannah Mae and little Chris. Again, very strong circumstantial evidence. We went back a few days later and did another search where we got even more shell casings. I think he stopped at 12 as far as making positive matches, because at some point you don't need to do any more. And it's more than just a field, match, right? It's under a microscope and going through the process required in that. So again, very strong circumstantial evidence. Somebody who either lived there or at least fired a weapon at 260 Peterson Road had the same gun that killed 5 of our 8 victims.
Correct.
And
Jake
we
pled
know that
for the
that
5.
property was deeded to Jake and George, who lived there with their mother.
I'm not going to make it, y'all. I'm telling you right
In
now, I'm
1911,
having a whole fit.
Also very strong circumstantial evidence. Ultimately, you heard Matt White say in July of 2017, which was a couple months after our search at Peterson Road when they found these shell casings, that he finally got a breakthrough and was able to figure out that that weapon that likely caused the tool markings on the cartridge cases that were left behind was likely a 1911 22 Walther Colt. And they found that out because the BCI lab in Bowling Green ran across one of them, and the word was out. He belongs to a lot of organizations and certainly to BCI, and was asking for help in finding, because it was such a unique marking.
Right.
And
put that weapon in the defendant's hand.
So it wasn't the gun that was used, but it was a gun that was similar enough. And after talking to the engineers in Germany and finding out that that was a unique firing pin that caused those unique tool markings, he concluded that we were looking for a 1911-22. And where does that 1911-22 turn up? Well, none other than in Jake Wagner's hand. When we get that Montana,
Jake Wagner is not on trial. Oh my God.
Wagner's phone. And in that backup, there is a picture of this gun on January 31st, 2015, a date you'll remember. And
Like, I can say what I want and feel
then
how I
there's a
want because I'm not
picture
sitting on
later
this
of it.
jury.
gun
The
is
jurors
on the
have
floor,
a much more difficult task ahead of them because, oh
actually
my
in Jake
stars.
Wagner's hand. So now we have what we believe could be the murder weapon in the hand of one of
If
the
she takes out her earrings and says bullshit, I'm
also
done.
have a
Cement
gun
shoes. Although I don't think Chandler's actually took out her earrings,
We
but
got
she
that
looked like she
from
wanted
when,
to.
Special Agent Scheider told Jake Wagner's phone. We saw this gun list on the phone at that time, right? And you'll remember that gun list. It has just a list of weapons. In fact, I think Mr. Parker went over it with the defendant when the defendant was on the stand. And it was a list of who had what guns. Now, you've heard from Jake Wagner that that actually was an inventory of the guns that they owned in January of 2000 or February of 2015 when he first made that gun list. And then I think it was revised a few months later. But on that gun list, we had the 1911-22, which again, at that time,
Which for the final time is not.
the likely type of gun, anyhow. And we had an SKS 762 by 39 listed as belonging to George, the 1911 belonging to Jake on that inventory list.
Gotcha.
So again, this gun list was also further circumstantial evidence. Maybe not quite as strong as our ballistic evidence and our shoe print evidence because those are specific. But we had the type of weapons that were likely used in this case listed as belonging to the Wagners. And we knew that 762 by 39 was important because you heard from Matt White about the heavier grain that tool ammo actually was, and that he knew from his initial ballistics review that that was a heavier grain bullet that had been used. We also had additional information from Chris Newcomb that George was a Glock guy and that he liked his Glocks and that he had helped him get a 40 caliber Glock back during closer to the homicides, and that he had met, Randa had gone with him and they had met the guy that they were buying it from at a rest stop.
Council wish to take a morning break at this time.
Yeah, let's do that because you need to regroup, ma'am. I don't want to be this person. Please don't make me be this person.
Morning break. It's 11 o'clock, so recess until 11. Time to the jury room to be brought up to the court.
All right. So let's talk about this situation here with these closing arguments. First of all, I know she's not done. Okay. But honestly, let's just break it down like the way that it is. The truth of the matter is all 14 of you guys that are in this chat right now watching and me makes 15. That's enough for a jury with 3 alternates. Okay. So, now we're up to 15. All right. So all 16 of us, we're just going to have some extra alternates because it's cold and flu season. Anyway, we're all listening. We've all listened. The only thing that we have not gotten to hear that the jury got to hear was some testimony, specifically the most important testimony would be from Jake and Angela Wagner. However, we have some idea about what they must have testified to. First of all, there was the 10-minute audio leak, which I played for you guys, right? Then that's from Jake. We know a little bit about what she testified to based on questions that George was asked under direct and also under cross-examination. Okay. However, if I'm evaluating this case as a juror, which is exactly what we're all doing right now, for me, Jake and Angela's testimony is going to be suspect from jump because of the fact that they got such a good plea deal. Angela got a much better plea deal, obviously, than Jake, but Jake admitted to being there and actually pulling the trigger. So he wasn't going to get a fantastic deal, but he got a deal nonetheless. Okay. And he wanted his brother and his father to have the capital punishment portion removed off of their cases. So he has a reason, right, to be less than honest about what took place. Okay. So if we're rating the weight of witness testimony on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being the least amount of weight, 10 being the highest amount of weight. For me, Angela and Jake's get about a 3. Okay. For me, the most important evidence in this case against George is his testimony and those wiretaps and the shoes. Okay. We have established that Angela bought those shoes. Angela even says that she bought those shoes. Okay. They match the prints and blood. We got it. Okay. What we don't have is, and I can't think of anybody that actually did this, because if they had, I would have remembered, and I think she would have brought it up closing, or she should have. But somebody has got to put those shoes, one pair of shoes, on George Wagner's feet. Now, I would suspect that just by height alone, Jake is shorter than George, right? George is shorter than Billy. Okay. So if I had to guess, and also Angela herself admits that she bought the shoes for her boys. And Billy was not even living. Billy was back and forth between that Peterson house and the Flying W. Like Angela and Billy their relationship was not in a good place. Okay. So she refers to her boys. I would imagine, just because I'm a mom of boys, I only refer to my sons as boys. I don't refer to my husband as boys, as the boys. So there you go. Okay, we understand the purchase of the shoes, but what we don't have, which is what we need, is those shoes on George's feet. So I would suspect that Jake would be the 10.5 and that George would be the 11. Okay, but you need to tell the jury that. You have got to tie this together in a bow. Okay, not for any other reason than the jury is listening to closing arguments. Okay. I know they're not allowed to take notes during opening, and I don't think they are allowed to take notes during closing, but I'll have to get back to you on that tonight. I'll look that up just to be sure. But they are taking mental notes. Okay. And what you'd want to do ideally is give the jurors bullet points of things to think about and look back on when they're doing their deliberations. So if it were me, right, I would want to look back on the testimony of the shoe print expert. Okay, that's important. And the testimony of any of the agents from BCI that measured Billy, Jake, and George's shoes sizes, right? That's important. Okay. I would also want to remind the jury of the disconnect between what George said on the stand and what those audio, those wiretaps from the phones and from the truck, and also BCI's interview with George. I would want to remind them to go back and listen to those audios because those are very, very telling. In fact, to be frank, they are the most telling information, evidence in this case, in my opinion. I would not want to belabor the point of Jake and Angela too much to this jury for the simple fact that Jake and Angela pled guilty. Okay. There's no need to try them again in front of this jury. Their guilt has been established. What has not been established in all, I feel like there's been 5 days. No, it has to be more than that. No, 5, I think, because, yeah, 3 last week. Then there was another time the week before where it was a half day. And then there was another time before that where they didn't come in at all. So 5, maybe 6 days tops, right? Where there wasn't, where the jury wasn't present. But they've been present every other day and they've been paying attention. I know they have. So, because we're getting reports out of the courtroom, and the reports that we get out of the courtroom are really good. I mean, they're very thorough. So they're paying attention. So stop. You don't, in my opinion, you don't want the jury to be focused on Jake and Angela because you've already secured their guilt. They took a plea deal. They're going to be sentenced. It's over for them, right? You need to focus on George. Focus on the fact that, yes, he continues to distance himself from his family, right? Despite the fact that the conversations we listen to, whether it comes in the form of audio or text or computer searches, searches on the behalf of the BCI, what was actually on their computer, the screenshots, etc. You've got to show the disconnect between George's testimony, because I have to tell you guys, when I watched it the first time with everybody, and then now that I'm working on this video and I'm going back and I'm clipping it, George's testimony, George came off as credible. And I'm talking about credible because to the jury, not credible to me this in the same way, because I have the advantage of hearing and knowing things that the jury doesn't get to hear and cannot consider. Okay. So it's a little bit different. Do I think that the likelihood of George participating in these crimes is very strong? Yes, I do. The fact of the matter is, this family functioned as a team, as a single unit. Everything was a committee meeting, particularly between George, Jake, and Angela. Everything was a committee meeting. They even went to the Walmart together, which I find, why would you go to Walmart together for you just to sit in the car? Like, Walmart is not around the corner from where they live. It's not that far of a drive, but who wants to take a drive, right? You're sitting in the car, you have to drive the distance, and then you sit in the car waiting for the shopping to get done at the Walmart and the checkout, blah, 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 blah. Like, I don't even understand the point of that. But that's how this family rolled. I would not go to the Walmarts if I wasn't going to get out of the hell. I wouldn't go anywhere if I wasn't going to get out of the car, unless it's to the drive-through, obviously. Okay, I just detest sitting and waiting in the car. It's one of my pet peeves. But not only were they sitting in the car, George and Jake, but the kids were in the car too. So that's even extra annoying. Everybody knows how little ones don't like to sit in the car doing nothing. It's one thing if the car is moving. It's another thing if the car is just sitting. They get bored. It's normal behavior for a child. But that's how this family rolled. Everything was a committee decision. Everything required, whether you want to call it a meeting, a powwow, a talking to, a sit down in the kitchen, whatever you want to call it, whatever word you want to use to describe it, they made decisions together. Period. End of sentence. End of story. And that's the part that it's sort of like when she was doing George's cross exam. She would go in and you would see her teeth show a little, and then she would back off. And there were many, many opportunities in that cross examination where she went way harder at George, and she could have elicited what she was attempting to elicit. She wanted to provoke him and evoke a response, an emotional, angry. She wanted him to lose his cool. But what ended up happening is she fell short because she backed off a little bit and she gave him time to regroup and calm down. And for a perfect example of an attorney understanding the person that they're questioning, Camila Vasquez. I cannot say this enough. What got Amber Heard was not just the questions, but it was the tone that she used, but it was that rapid fire, one after the other, after the other, after the other. And when it came to the charity, not allowing Amber to simply say, I made an obligation or I made a commitment. Did you actually pay them? That type. That's the type of questioning that needed to occur, in my opinion, with George. And the thing of it is I don't have a law degree. So I don't know. I can't say to her, well, you should have asked this or you should have asked that. What I can say is the way that you ask the questions, because that I know is not illegal. I mean, it is a fine line between, asking the questions and becoming argumentative, right? But she knows that line. She's an attorney and I'm not. But I watched George Wagner. I've listened to him talk in that audio. I listened to his exchanges between George and Angela. I listened to the exchanges between George and Jake, and I listened to the exchanges between the three of them, right? So that I feel that that would have been a much more effective approach if she would have done it like that. But she is losing the jury by be. This is your word, Miss Canepa. I'm telling you, like, you've got a few more. Well, no, you're about to be back in. But if you don't finish up by lunch and you go to lunch, please, on your lunch break, call me. I'll tell you exactly what this jury needs to hear, because I'm this jury. It's people like me that listen to the case. And there's a difference between people like me believing that George is guilty, which I absolutely do believe that George is guilty. I believe that he was 173% a part of this crime. Okay? But based on what you've presented in court, I don't know if you've gotten there, ma'am. And if you want to point the jury in the right direction for the evidence to find him guilty of these crimes, call me. I'll tell you exactly where it is. Exactly where it is. Because it is there. It is there. You just got to point the jury in the right direction, because I guarantee you, when it's the defense's turn, they're going to take every single thing that you have said thus far since we started almost 2 hours ago, and they're going to pick it apart, and they're going to be effective at it. They're going to pick apart the circumstantial case, and you think they're not going to you don't think that they're going to remind this jury that you have failed to put those shoes on George Wagner's feet. Now, I'm good to go until noon. You guys know how I roll. Because I like for people to be able to catch up. And I find, frankly, it's difficult to catch up on a live that's more than like 3 hours long. Although I'm going to be pushing it, because we're at 2:24 right now, and it's 45 minutes until until noon. But I'll say this: between now and tonight, I'm going to go back through the testimony and see if at any point they ever put those shoes on George's feet, because they really need to. Because George, I was listening again. I was listening to his direct testimony last night and yesterday, and a little bit on Saturday and Friday. I have to say, on Thursday, I didn't do anything but watch TV and play Matchington Mansion. And then I cooked dinner. So for me, I want, when I listen, George had a ready explanation for the duck or the goose, whatever that thing was called. It's not a blind. I think they call it a goose house. And I got to be honest with you, he came off as believable. And I'm not saying that I believe him. I'm just saying that he came off as believable. I don't believe him, to be quite honest with you. But he did come off as believable. And if that's how I'm feeling, there is a very good chance that at least one person sitting on that jury thinks the same as me, because her burden of proof is far higher than the defense's. So rather than be worrying about, you've got to get that one juror, worst case scenario, go split it. You got 6 for and 6 against. You got to work on convincing those other 6 that George is not credible, and you got to point out the reasons why he's not credible. That's what they need to hear. Because you start to do it, and then you back off from it. And that's what I think I'm getting so incredibly frustrated frustrated. I know she has the capability. I know she's incredibly intelligent. Miss Canepa, you know how you get irritated and you've done it like 3 times? And listen, I don't blame you. I'd be irritated too if somebody was objecting in the middle of my pontification. I would be pissed. If somebody came in my room right this minute and said objection right when I'm on a roll, I would be livid. Okay. And so you know how that makes you feel. And so when the defense says what their objection is based on and you fire back, that energy, that's the energy this jury needs to see for the remainder of the closing argument, period. End of story. That's what they need to see. That's what they need to hear. Take all of those times he was rude, and everybody knows that the only reason why you would ever object in the middle of closing arguments is to throw them off their game, to steal a little thunder, screw with the momentum. It's a game because we've seen it 11 a billion times, right? Where this has happened before. And what does the judge say? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, these are closing arguments. You're not to base the weight of the evidence on the closing arguments, but the evidence itself, yada, 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 right? They say it every single time. That's the ruling every single time. Period. Exactly. See, perfect point. This is an absolutely perfect point. For a jury, right? This joker is up on the stand admitting to crimes that they've never even been charged with, right? Going into detail about crimes they weren't even suspected in, right? So for a juror, sits back and thinks, well, if he's being honest about this, he's probably being honest about it all. And she needed to steal that thunder from him. She needed to say, great, you've admitted that you committed arson with your family, whether you lit the match or not. You knew about it, you didn't report it, and you moved your belongings out on the last one. So you know what they're up to. You went with your dad and you broke into vending machines at hotels, although Jake was better at picking locks than you were. You talk about how you committed insurance fraud on vehicles. You talked about how your family stole fuel. You talked about how your family completely just took a whole semi trailer and things fell off the truck, and before you know it, the whole town of Piketon is wearing these boots, right? Okay, hot tubs, etc. But you needed to take that thunder away from him because he's lying about a great many things. I do, Heather, whatever, and I've been thinking about this, you guys, because I know you're all aware because we see each other on these streets. We see each other in other chats, and we've all seen the shenanigans that have been going around. And quite honestly, I think my specialty, what I'm going to learn, is all these people out here wanting to fuck around and find out. When you do find out and you need representation, just saying. Oh, I've muted him. I'm like, why can't I hear? Okay. Sorry.
Evidence regarding the defendant specifically. Clearly, the circumstantial evidence of just how controlling they were as a group, especially the subset of 3 that lived on Peterson Road, in regards to their girlfriends, wives, mother of their children, and how obsessed they were about gaining custody of their children. The Facebook hacking that was going on, again, is circumstantial evidence. We discovered that, again, once we got the laptop from Montana. We first found those hundreds of pages during the State Route 41 search, but then when we got the laptop, we found thousands of screenshots. And again, that is circumstantial evidence as well. False exculpatory statements are circumstantial evidence. So, and also a strong indicia of guilt. So anytime you're giving a false story about what happened or where you were or what you did or anything, that can be indicia of guilt as well. And the false story that we got from every single one of them was that everything was great between Hanna and Jake, right? There were no problems, like a little sister to me, love her with all my heart, loved her like a daughter, all that stuff. Couldn't say anything bad about any of the other Rhodens either. But then we see the Facebook message from Hanna Mae saying that she won't sign papers ever, they'll have to kill her first. And we know that in 4 short months later, she and 7 members of her family are dead. So that's circumstantial evidence, right? We can see that the relationship is not as they're being described, but for some reason they're describing it as great. Okay. And specifically, the defendant was one of those people. Purchases of parts to build a silencer. All along, we thought the silencer was used in this case just because of the close proximity, especially when you are in scene 2 with Frankie and Hanna Hazel, and when you are in scene 3 with Dana and Hanna Mae and little Chris. We always believed that there had to have been a silencer used, in particular at those locations, but actually we knew that the SKS was shot from outside and assumed there's a silencer for that too. So here we get financial records, and then the financial records, the bank accounts then require you, the follow-up to that is to get subpoenas out to eBay or various stores, Tactical Innovations or whatever, where you see them making purchases from, and then get the details about those purchases. So we have them buying various parts to build a homemade silencer. And have them Google searching how to do that. A solvent catcher. You heard about that the solvent catcher is screwed onto the end of the barrel. It's purportedly to catch cleaning fluid, but if you alter it just a little bit, then it becomes a silencer for your gun. They're canned matching responses. Again, circumstantial evidence when they're all saying kind of the same things. Billy not returning the phone calls of Chris, even though we see Chris Sr. calling Billy's phone repeatedly on the night of homicides, and it going to voicemail, and him checking voicemail, but him never calling Chris Sr. back. Again, circumstantial evidence that he knew that Chris was deceased. Billy staying there at the house for the first time that night, right? The tattoos, I don't want to belabor this too much, but again, this is circumstantial evidence. At least we would submit that it is circumstantial evidence. Twofold, or maybe threefold. First fold is just the fact that the 3 boys went to get tattoos together in early June, just a little over a month after the homicides were complete. They all go together to the Shamrock tattoo place. Jake gets Cummins pistons, but Billy gets a scorpion tattoo on his trigger finger. So right along where you would rest a gun when you are shooting somebody. That in and of itself was, we considered circumstantial evidence, because certainly the scorpion represents death, and on your trigger finger was suspicious. But then we later couple that with, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the Boondocks movie, that we see that movie clip being watched on the night of the homicides, approximately 4 hours before Chris and Gary are laying in a pool of their own blood at scene 1. So around 7 o'clock that evening is when Jake's phone Googles that video clip. And of course, you already heard from him that he watched it and he showed his brother as well. And we knew the theme of that was two brothers who do vigilante type killings. They just kind of select who they believe deserve to die or should die. And there's a religious component to it. And so we knew that much. And we knew that Jake had dyed his hair to look like Norman Reedus being the Daryl in The Walking Dead, and one of the brothers in this Boondock Saints movie. And we knew that from Chris Newcomb, that he had dyed his hair along with George, and that Jake specifically said he did it to look like Norman Reedus. And then you've got him watching this video clip. And then you have the scorpion tattoo, which took a while longer to figure out, or to, again, what we believe is circumstantial evidence in this case, is that at the very end of the second Boondock Saints movie, the dad of the two brothers, kills his best friend. You heard after Cross, I think Mr. Parker asked Special Agent Scheider if a Glock was in Boondock Saints, and lo and behold, yes, it was a Glock that the father used to kill his best friend in the ending scene in Boondock Saints 2. And before he kills him, though, they have a discussion about the scorpion and the frog, and I had Special Agent Scheider talk about that. Some of you may have heard this parable before then. But, you know, the whole, you shouldn't trust me because that's my nature, right? The frog was too trusting and he ends up dead. And the scorpion midstream, even though it also means that he goes down because it's his nature. The scorpion can't help himself, and the frog shouldn't have been trusting. So again, is that proof positive? Do we know for sure that that's a fact? We do not know that that's a fact. Nobody has told us that that is a fact. However, again, it does seem suspicious, and we consider it circumstantial evidence, given that they watched the Boondock Saints video clip that night. It is about two brothers and ultimately a father who go out doing these vigilante killings. George's tattoo, you heard from the tattoo artist, and he indicated that he drew that on George. But you also heard from both George and the tattoo artist that they do look through books ahead of time while they're waiting to get their tattoo. I'm sure much for the ladies in the jury, much like I suppose the hairdresser, where you're looking through and getting ideas that you might want the person to try on you. And that he thought that the skull idea might have come from George, but he couldn't really remember, but that he free-handed it on George and, you know, see if he likes it, and then he goes. Again, it seems awfully ironic that there is a skull with crossbones, not just a skull, but a skull with crossbones, which is obviously the universal sign of death, with an 8-ball in it when there are 8 victims in this case, and then 3 aces instead of the traditional 4 aces that the tattoo artist said. He usually does either 4 aces or 3 aces and 2 eights, the aces and eights, that is the dead man's hand, right? So again, are the 3 aces Jake, George, and Billy? You know, again, we found it suspicious that that tattoo ends up on his arm a little over a month after the homicides happened. Circumstantial evidence, again, the way the family functions, just their obsession, their how they let things get carried away as far as their suspicions and their reactions to those suspicions. The silencer that we pulled out from the well at Peterson Road is strong circumstantial evidence, right? Again, we saw them buying the parts. Now we have a silencer that has all those parts that we saw them buying. The mag light, the freeze plugs, so the adapter, and it was used. And again, now we know that it was a template that misfired and didn't work well, and so they resorted to something else. But at the time that we pulled it out of the well, we didn't know that, but that still was extremely strong circumstantial evidence. Again, at the cistern at 260 Peterson Road. And we got information from the Maglite company that Maglite itself, because there's serial numbers, because people do actually use it to make homemade silencers, and you register it with ATF using the serial number of Maglite. So that's why Maglites have that serial number for you. And we got information from the Maglite company that particular Maglite was manufactured in January of 2016. So we knew, for instance, it wasn't some former owners had been there for years. This was a more recent occurrence, and certainly after January of 16, which is, we knew when they had started making the other purchases. The burned up DVR that we found at their home, right? Again, very highly circumstantial evidence. Why do you buy a DVR in March of 2016, put it up on your home, and then take it down and burn it? Before we had the direct testimony of Angela and Jake, that was strong circumstantial evidence, right? That they bought a 3-year warranty for that item, if you'll recall. So, and we were able to positively match it with the, we purchased the DVR system and compared it to the burned up item, and you guys all were able to see that, and there's photographs of that for you as well, demonstrating that it is an exact match. The familiarity that the family had with the victims in this case.
I think you meant familiarity, but that's all right.
Dana's home the week of the homicides, putting up the crib for Kylie. You heard on the video surveillance that he got a tour of that location. And I believe the defendant said he was with Jake one time when he picked up Sophia from that location. But we knew that whoever committed these crimes had to know the family fairly well, because we knew that Dana and Hanna and little Chris had just moved into that place 30 days prior. So somebody would have to know them well enough to know that. Kind of ruled out the drug cartel, because people that are, just have dealings with one person isn't going to know the extended family situation. But again, we knew that they had been in each of those homes. Jake used to live or stay sometimes with Hanna at the location where Frankie and Hanna Hazel were, and they had been inside of Chris Sr.'s home as well. Again, the Boondock Saints video clip. Watching that shortly before what we believe to be the time period of the homicides, when it is two brothers carrying out those crimes, using 1911 22s with silencers on them, homemade silencers, wearing black ski masks, other similarities that
they wear pea coats.
We saw was one point they're hiding in a container at a warehouse, and they come up and they jump out and start shooting. And I already talked to you about the father killing his best friend at the end of that. So again, we wouldn't have even looked at that or thought about that if that video clip had not been played that night. So, again, that was strong circumstantial evidence in that we already believed the 1911-22 was used in this offense. Both of them dyeing their hair, right? So
who else dyed their hair?
Jake said that it had nothing to do with the homicides, and by that meaning in an effort to dye their hair so that if they lost a hair at the scene, we wouldn't think it was them. It has more to do with the fact that they dyed their hair to look like the brothers in Boondock Saints, right? And specifically, Jake admits that he dyed his hair to look like Norman Reedus. So again, they both dyed their hair the week of the homicides. We got that information ahead of time from Chris Newcomb. Obviously, that has been since confirmed by Jake. the custody documents that they filled out on April the 3rd. Again, these were forged documents, right? They were printed out on April 3rd. You will have these. It's CC 295A through C. That's the actual physical exhibit. We got that out of State Route 41 in George's truck, in a tub, actually on top. There's photographs from that search at State Route 41, and you'll see the plastic tub. It's got a clear lid, and it's got those, actually the Hanna one right on top. So you will be able to see those. I think we either passed them around or showed them to you enough that you knew it is a raised notary stamp. So it's not like it's a document that was on the computer that they printed off the computer that was already filled out. They printed out a blank one, they filled it out, and then put that notary stamp on it, not noticing that April 3rd had been spit out by the computer at the bottom of those. And there are 3 of those, right? There is what I call if I die before I wake, I want my child to go to Jake, right? The Hanna May.
Well, that was clever.
That she allegedly, they made it look like she filled it out in December of 2014. And why is that an important date? Well, A, because it was Christmas Eve that they put on the document, and arguable or logical that maybe Rita would have been around such that she could have put her signature on that or notarized it. And that was also getting close to the last holiday it was the last holiday that Hanna spent with them when she was still with Jake, because she left him, broke off the relationship in early 2015. So they had to make it a time when everything was still good between them. And then likewise for the boys, they each fill out one of their own, right? So if anything happens to us less than 3 weeks from now, while we're trying to kill 8 people on Union Hill Road and Left Fork Road, if anything happens to one of us, whether we get hurt, killed, arrested, I want to know that my child is secure and will go to Angela, our mom. So they both filled it out. They also both forged those, forgery being defined, and we'll go over the charges later, but backdating is forgery. You can't fill out a document so that it looks like it was filled out at a time different than when it was actually filled out. So, but again, strong circumstantial evidence, right? Why are they filling out custody documents in Hanna's name so that if she turns up dead 2.5 weeks later, Jake gets custody? Or if something happens to one of them. So again, strong, very strong circumstantial evidence. And again, those documents were found during the State Route 41 search. The video.
Hey, Mark, good to see you.
From State Route 772, and
I don't think you're the only one. I mean, he's got several charges against him, so the odds are that he would likely be found guilty of something related to this, but
this was from the Boondock Saints.
I'm not 100% sure that it will be on the highest charges. I don't know. I don't know.
So you will have this map in one of your.
Oh, I believe, but I will say this. I believe he's 100% guilty.
And this is the map, the red being the crime scenes, which you'll recognize. And keeping in mind that 799 Left Fork Road is not accurate. I think.
But I'm glad you're here with us.
Donald Stone walked to the nearest mailbox because Kenneth did not have one. And so that's how that kind of got memorialized in the wrong ways on our diagrams, etc. But it's actually 1084 Left Fork Road is where Kenneth resided. But the purple things on there are where the surveillance footage is located. And you will see, and we do have a guide, but again, circumstantially, there's, two vehicles. That's what we first noticed, the two vehicles that were traveling very close to one another in the early morning hours of April 22nd of 2016. So this is the one where we did the jury view, and we drove the route that Jake said they drove, basically, with the caveat that once you go either right on 772 or left on 772, that, let's point this out. Once you go either right or left, then there's multiple ways to get down to Left Fork Road. And Jake was not sure which route they took after that point. But you can see this actually also corroborates Jake's testimony in the fact that there initially is that single vehicle that you see going down to Left Fork Road. And that's when they go by to check on whether or not Kenneth is there and what's going on down there. And then later you see both vehicles go by, and that would be when Jake and Billy are in one vehicle and George is following in the vehicle that they purchased from Uncle Toddy. So, and you'll be able to see that, and like I said, you'll have a guide that tells you, along with the adjustment for the time, because one of them is like 14 minutes time difference, but that's all clearly spelled out. But then you can see them going left the second time, and then they get picked up on the 1470.
Yes, Cement. Tell her.
Keep in mind that George stopped off at
I'm still shook.
turnaround up the road from Kenneth's house on that second trip. So, and then you also see them coming back when they're done. So you will have that, the videos and all that. But again, circumstantial evidence that those vehicles were involved in the crime at the time we saw them, because that was, basically at that hour, the only traffic that we had. But now it corroborates Jake's testimony as well. Okay, so let's talk about the direct evidence that we have in this case.
Yes, let's.
So the direct evidence, again,
Good idea.
is the testimony of people that were present, and some physical evidence, can fall into that category as well. But we will talk to you about, again, you will get an instruction on how to weigh the testimony of an accomplice. So you will be receiving instructions on how to weigh the testimony of people in general. And you're not to disregard that. You're to use that same thing when weighing the testimony of any witness, whether it's an expert that has additional instructions for you, whether it's an accomplice that has additional instructions for you. You'll be told you should weigh the defendant's testimony by the same standard. So that standard that you're given, you should still use when weighing the testimony of the experts and the accomplice, in this case, Jake and Angela. But you will have additional ones. And one of those instructions, I think I mentioned to you in voir dire too, that all of you, I think, said you would want to hear from the other pirates on the ship, but that you would go into it with your eyes wide open and you'd want to know that, they're telling you the truth, right? That they don't have any hidden motives or hidden agendas, or they're trying to get out from underneath something, whatever the case may be, whatever factors you guys wanted to know. The instruction that you will get, and I think, again, I mentioned this in voir dire, is that you are to regard their testimony with grave suspicion. That sounds very grave. But again, if you find that you believe them, you're also going to have an instruction that one person's word, if believed by you, is sufficient to resolve any disputed fact. So if you believe, and of course that's the if, right?
Excuse me.
Then you can convict somebody based on the testimony of the other where they were paid with them. And otherwise available to us, other than the other people that were participating in these crimes with them.
Oh dear.
Okay, so let's talk about Jake and Angela's testimony.
I
The
promise, Corky.
First
I
thing I would
promise.
say is
I got you.
obviously Jake Wagner gave us a lot of information, not us here in the courtroom, but us during his proffer, and then led us to some evidence, right? His testimony was corroborated by physical evidence. He led us to the murder weapons. He led us to the weapon that he initially tried to modify, ammunition that he didn't even know was in there. All these items in these concrete buckets that we find at the bottom of the lake at Flying W. So we know that he is telling us the truth about something, right? Because this isn't, he can't imagine the buckets into existence, right? He'd been locked up. You heard November 2018 is when they were locked up. You heard that April of 2021 is when he entered his plea of guilty. And so he gave us that information, gave us that physical evidence. He also gave us the truck that they used. And keep in mind that these are not things we knew about, right? We did not know where the weapons were. We very much wanted to know where the weapons were. We wanted to know where the victim's phones were.
Blessed, are you trying to say that Jake was a helperton? Because if that's the case, I
never
can't.
been able to find that. Now, you guys have also been to the Flying W.
Excuse me.
You've been to Peterson Road. We're talking, obviously, the Flying W, much more vast, because that's thousands of acres. But even Peterson Road is a big enough property that you could theoretically hide that stuff anywhere, right? So, but he gave us the physical evidence. He gave us the truck that they used, and we were able to recover that truck from Katie Wagner, the cousin.
Did you
Jake
put
and George Wagner.
George Washington
And
Wagner
she
the
came in
fourth
there and
in
she told you
that
what happened.
truck
That
on
morning,
that
in the
night?
very early morning hours, Billy Wagner comes rolling up to their house, unannounced, not expected, and in a hurry, by the way. You know, so before the sun has even risen, before they're out of bed, he's at their house in a truck for Katie. Here's this truck for you, Katie. And then expecting Bobby Wagner, his brother, to take him back to Peterson Road, which was a good distance. And was in a hurry, you heard her say, because he said that he was going on a trip with Chris Rhoden. So there's obviously no reason to doubt anything that Katie Wagner had to say to you. She also said she was so excited about finally having a truck or a vehicle that she titled it the same day that she got it. And you will have that title, and you will be able to see that it was titled on April 22nd of 2016, which would be the day that she got it, and obviously the morning of the homicides. So again, what Jake had to tell us was corroborated with physical evidence that we didn't know about. It was also corroborated with physical evidence we did know about. So that was helpful to us. Then we talked to Angela Wagner, and she corroborates what Jake Wagner told us. They basically corroborate each other. And
They also
magical and
took
mystical
plea
thing about
deals.
that is, as you heard, she was not provided with her son's statement. She had no idea what he said to us when he sat down with us. She testified that she still does not have that, and that's on purpose. We don't want her to have that. We don't want her to change her testimony or fill in gaps or, you know, borrow memories or try to make it sound the same.
Okay, that's a good point. All right, all right.
One of the other participants in these homicides, we wanted to know if we could bank on what Jake was telling us, right?
Although, to be fair, Angela wasn't there that day,
completely corroborate.
so she couldn't
don't
corroborate what
think we should take
happened
that
at the
lightly, right?
scenes. But
For instance, she already said that she bought the shoes for Jake and George.
I swear, if you don't put those
Jake
shoes on George's feet,
said
I'm going to be
She
so
bought the
upset.
shoes for he and George, and that he and George wore those shoes that night when they committed the homicides. That he wore the 10.5 and his brother wore the 11s. We know that there's a 10.5 and an 11 in that scene. And Angela tells us and tells you that when George and Jake and Billy had to go down and get their feet measured and traced and molds made of their feet.
Okay, now we're getting to it.
She was having a discussion with George afterwards because recall, she felt terrible because at the border, she kind of flunked that test, right? They threw the receipt at her and the video at her, and she wasn't prepared to respond to that. They knew we had metal detectors. They were all, prepared to respond to the ballistics. Because many people shoot out there, right? But she didn't have an answer ready for the shoes, and she felt bad about that. She told you she felt bad about that. But she says when she's talking to George about it, he says one of the shoe prints is mine. I wanted to smudge it out before I left, but my dad said no. Come on, don't worry about it. Come on. That's what she tells us. And that, again, matches what Jake has to say about who wore the shoes and who was in scene 1.
Okay,
right?
okay, that's, now she's putting the shoes on the foot,
And
okay.
that's specifically the shoe print they were talking about. That's what had been shown to them was the shoe print that was in the blood.
There you go. This is what we needed. Okay.
So now we know from 2 different sources who didn't know what anybody had to say about it. And I want you to think about that too. We'll talk about weighing the reasonableness of what people are saying, right? Is it believable what they're saying? Do they have motives to lie to you? Etc. Think back to George's phone call in 2018 when they could feel the noose tightening around their neck, basically. They knew that arrests were inevitable. And so they were starting to line up attorneys. They were visiting attorneys. They were deciding who was going to hire who, how we were going to pay for this, who should get the best attorney. If you'll recall,
Angela
George wanted Angela to have the best attorney, right?
Which,
do you remember that?
please.
Because he wanted her to remain free or be the one to beat the case the quickest.
Right.
So that she could take care of the children because she was best suited for taking care of the children. Again, this is all on a call that George made to Angela in 2018.
All right, now
I believe it was August.
tie it into him being a lying liar mouth who tells lies.
That he wants her to have the best attorney so that she can get out. So armed with that, Angela very easily could have said, I knew nothing about this. I knew nothing about this. I'm going to say whatever I have to say to get myself free from this because that's what my boys even want. George wants me to be free. But that's not what she did. And that's not what Jake did, right? Both Jake and Angela tell you they are guilty. Jake is guilty. Angela is guilty. They don't deny that. They don't lie about that. They don't blame somebody else. They could have all said it was Billy. Billy is the one that's kind of ostracized from them. He's the one that's over here. We could all just say it's Billy or whatever. Or Angela could have assumed that Jake took the full blame. She saw him stand up in court and plead to 8 counts of aggravated burglary or aggravated murder. She heard that he had pled to all the counts in the indictment. So she could have assumed that he took full blame for it and just made up a story that said that. The reason their stories are consistent, the reason their stories match is because they both finally decided to tell the truth. Right? And we insisted on it as much as you can insist on that, right? I don't want false statements. I don't want, the only thing we are interested in is the truth. who actually committed these crimes. How did it happen? And you heard, you know, I know that Mr. Parker has called this the deal of the century for Jake Wagner, the deal of the century. But let's just talk a little bit about that. First of all, he pled guilty to every count in the indictment except for the death penalty specifications, which we dismissed in exchange for him telling us what happened, not just telling us what happened, but you heard from Special Agent Scheider that the victim's family was consulted in this. And as you might imagine, if this was somebody that you loved, you would want to know what happened more than anything. Some of them got the peace of mind they were looking for because their loved one was sleeping. Some of them did not, but they wanted to know. And they wanted us to do the deal so that they could learn what happened. And so that we could get physical evidence so that we could hold all 4 people who committed these crimes and killed their loved ones.
Yes.
Accountable.
Amelia, I
It's no
do.
good if just 1 or 2 of them are held accountable and the
I
other
sure
2,
do.
if they're involved, escape. That's no good.
I think she's wrapping it up.
So armed with that,
Maybe. No.
we sit down with Jake, and you heard for a very long time, close to 12 hours, over a period of 2 days. First, he tells us where the evidence is. We go and get the evidence. Corroborates his story. And again, he certainly wasn't telling us what we wanted to hear. We did not know half the stuff he told us, right? We were wrong about the order the victims were killed in. We had no idea about this drug deal ruse. We were constantly perplexed how it was that Chris and Gary were awake when they were killed. Maybe because Kenneth was coming over to take a shot. We had no idea, or they thought that's who it was, and they opened the door, and that's when things happened. There were a lot of things that we did not know that he told us that then made all the pieces make sense, right? So yes, we guard his testimony.
Because Amelia, it's an old case. It's from
We certainly
2016.
We didn't want to be tricked. We didn't want to fall into a trap. You know, they worked together. Maybe they had a plan ahead of time that, you know, Jake was going to take all the blame, or they were going to pin it on Billy or whatever. You know, we didn't want to fall into a trap. We wanted the truth. So we went and we sat with him and we heard.
I'm going to cover
everything he said to you.
that case too, because that one is fascinating to me.
4 days for you guys. But again, it was his testimony and his statement was corroborated by.
Because it's not about guilt or innocence. It's about insanity.
Evidence that we knew nothing about, but that we then had and could use regarding anybody else who was involved in this case. Angela Wagner, this is her son. Ask yourself, what motive would she have to say that George was involved? If George wasn't involved, why would you do that to your son? You would say Jake, Billy, and I did it, or just Jake did it. Jake and I did it. Whatever you say, why would you say that George was involved if George wasn't involved? The same thing with Jake. Why would you say your brother's involved unless he is involved? And remember, Jake, this is really 2 things about his statement. He told you, and I asked him, he wanted to make sure his statement was recorded because he wanted his family to hear his words. He didn't want us paraphrasing or telling them what he said. He wanted them to hear his words. The other thing that he asked us, and you will have his plea agreement, it's TT1, I think is his plea guilty plea, and I think T2 is his defendant's agreement. The defendant's agreement is, look, here's the rules. Here's the rules that we're going to play by. You're going to be truthful. You're going to give complete and accurate. You're not going to hide behind, I don't remember, or I don't know. You're going to answer our questions. You're going to tell the truth. And if you do that,
I think so, Cement, yes.
Expectations against you. And because he asked that the death penalty also be dismissed against his,
I think there's an element of that to it, but that's
truthfully in any of their cases, because he didn't want.
We'll go over. We'll talk about that tonight. Faux show.
We agreed to that. Again, after consulting with the family, right? He didn't do this plea to get his family in trouble. It's the opposite. He's trying to get them as much out of trouble as possible. The other thing that he asked us, that you will not see in this agreement, not something we agreed to.
Now that obscure ass trial you remember,
if there would be,
but not who Vinnie Politan is.
See his family one last time, his dad, his mom, his brother,
excuse me,
them before they go to prison for the rest of their lives. Now, if you're lying about them being involved, if George is completely innocent, didn't know anything about this, and I'm saying you helped me murder people, not a stealing fuel offense, but you helped me murder people, do I expect you to hug me? How ludicrous would that be? Now, I say it's probably a little naive of them to think that they're probably going to have any warm fuzzies anyhow, although I guess maybe his mom, since she decided to also come clean. But again, some of those things are the telling things that let you know that what they are telling you is true. The fact that their statements are consistent. You know, they were all together when they bought the shoes. She went in there and bought the shoes for them.
There is an out. Yes, Amelia, I think that you're thinking correctly, because this unaliving took place in a garage.
You know, those kinds of things are corroborated between the two of them, even though she didn't go up on the hill, right? The purchases that she was making.
Oh yes, we will be going over it soon as
all of those
these dadgum closing arguments are over.
Corroborate each other. You know, again, getting ahead of myself here a little bit, because I'm certainly going to talk about George's testimony, but the differences in their testimony was very stark, right? George and Angela just answered the questions. I got a whole lot of I don't remembers out of George Wagner when he was testifying. Even though he could remember things when he was a child in great detail, you know, he could seem to remember what he said at the border to the agents, you know, for a 4-hour interview, which one would think, you know, again, that's a pretty unique situation that you would remember exactly. And he did remember some things, right? He remembers saying, when I was questioning him about the fact that he called his grandmother a whore, called his 4-year-old niece at the time a bitch, called Randa, Tabitha, Beth Ann.
Hi, Alice. Alice is back in the game, y'all. She's decided.
Because at the border, he had said that he heard that she had turned into a whore. And he remembered that. He remembered saying that, because that's inconsequential. But he said he didn't remember a whole lot of things that mattered, right? But we'll talk about that.
You might be talking about that, but I have to stop sharing. All right, hang on. Stop sharing. Okay. So it's after 12, but not quite noon 30, as everybody's favorite Chazzle Dazzle likes to refer to the lunch hour. Can you guys hear her? She's purring. I've got to get off of here I've got to finish up a little bit of stuff left over from this week's chores. I got to vacuum. I got to put the jeans away. I can get them out of the dryer. So I think what we're going to do tonight, obviously, is listen to the rest of the closing arguments. I really feel like she keeps on talking about later. We'll get into that later. Here, I'll put the mic over here by her, see if you can hear it. Can you hear her? All right. So, she keeps talking about this later, right? So I'm feeling like the prosecution's closing is going to be all the day. And then I think the defense will probably be in the morning. So the good thing about this is that scam likely decline. So sorry, too many things. Okay, so thankfully we'll be able to finish Angela Canepa's closing argument on like 1.5 speed. Plus, we'll also be able to skip through like the lunch hour break that they take and whatnot. So that's what we'll do tonight. But we're also going to get into the Austin. I don't know how to say his last name. Let me scroll up and see if I can. I think it's Haroff. We'll get into, we'll talk about, just a little bit of his case too. So, because I definitely want to cover that one. And yeah, so anywho, thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it so much. If you have not done already, please give your girl a thumbs up. Ow, Alice, that is my thigh and that hurts. She's clawing me now. Excuse me while I have an outburst. There was something else I wanted to say. Crap. Hold on a minute. Give me just a sec, if you don't mind. I want to thank Gail for her super chat. I appreciate it so much. Thank you very much for your generosity. And thank you guys all for being here. And this is the longest goodbye ever because I'm super distracted. I'll see you guys tonight. Okay. I'm probably going to do 8:30 because I want to spend like 30 minutes talking about this next case. And then obviously, I'm going to have tons to say about the rest of the closing arguments. So there's that. All right. Thank you guys. Have a great rest of your Monday, and I will see y'all tonight. Okie dokie, artichoke. Okay, bye. Bye, you guys. Take care. Stay safe out here on these streets. Hey, coolest. All right. I'll see y'all tonight. All right. Bye.